Fargo. By Bavitz. Converted to audiobook by ARandomAudiobookAppeared. Category: Puella Magi Madoka Magica. Genre: Adventure. Words: 336,493. Rating: T. Status: Complete. Summary: Post-rebellion. In the frostbitten American Midwest, ragged magical girls vie for territory to survive the unforgiving landscape. One such girl is Sloan Redfearn, who wastes away in Fargo, North Dakota, nursing a grudge and watching her hopes slowly die. But when Kyubey approaches with a unique opportunity, she becomes embroiled in a conspiracy that threatens to topple gods. Chapter 1: Cherish the Merry-Go-Round. First Arc, Williston. 1. Cherish the Merry-Go-Round. A gaggle of amorphous shapes drifted behind the frost-coated front window of the convenience store. The door opened with a bell and the shapes coalesced into the form of a man, draped in rags and furs, blowing into his hands as he stomped his boots on the welcome mat. "We close in 5, said Sloan Redfearn behind the counter. Yup, said the man. The parts of his face visible behind the beard and trucker cap were beet red. He wiped his nose and shambled into the aisles, fingering each individual item on the shelves. Sloan could do nothing but watch. 10 minutes later, he deposited an armful of snacks and a 6-pack of beer onto the counter. "How's it, Sloan?" The man motioned at the name tag on her apron. His beard parted into an irrepressible smile. She swiped a bag of chips. "It's good." The man glanced over his shoulder, although they were and had always been the only two in the store. He leaned over the counter and lifted his eyebrow. "You lookin' for work?" "I got work." She was at it as they spoke. "I mean real work. You in school?" She swiped the last item and punched the numbers. 2037, please. "Acknowledge." The man patted his sides. He opened his patchwork coat and rifled through an interior pocket. His hand emerged with a billfold. "Reason I ask is, there's a demand for girls like you. Out in Williston. You know Williston, doll." He slapped down a 10, a 5, and 5 ones and started scavenging for change. "I know Waukegan," she said. Directly south of her present location, Fargo. When prey was scarce, she sometimes went down for leavings. "I'm saying Williston." He fished a quarter and delved for more. "Out west, near Bismarck but not quite. You know Bismarck?" Who was this guy, asking her about these pointless dead-end towns in a pointless dead-end state? She curled her hands around the edge of the counter and tapped her nails against the glass, her gaze fixed on his sausage fingers as they dipped in and out of the wallet. "Point is," he found a dime. "There's oil in Williston, you betcha. Big oil. All M corporations are setting shop for the long haul. We're talking big oil, big oil." He flapped his hands like a bird to demonstrate the bigness, accidentally launching coins from his open billfold. "And when there's oil, well, then there's men. Men to drill the oil, men to truck the oil, men to watch the men drilling the oil. A whole lot of men and none too many girls, you fish my drift." Sloane's eyes narrowed as she fished his drift. "If you continue this line of conversation, mister, it won't be until the snow melts they find you again." The man blinked, his smile hesitant but extant. Gauging whether to assert dominance or laugh it off and move on. He would choose the latter, eventually. Girls who talked like that weren't the girls he wanted. Sloane corrected her slouch and straightened like a centipede, looming a head taller than him. The counter was elevated, and erasing any conceit of good humor. Yup." The man crouched to retrieve the coins he dropped. The conversation died. He bid her good night as he left the store with his bags. Sloane waited until his truck rumbled away before closing shop. She locked the doors and stepped into the frigid bite of late autumn, temperatures approximating 0. Filthy mountains of week-old slush mouldered on the corners of the parking lot. A lone street lamp tilted overhead, blinking. She shuffled into her long brown overcoat, her most precious possession. She had pilfered it before she left Minneapolis. Trailing down to her boots, the furred interior could stave off freezing even in dead winter. At night it functioned as a blanket, and in summer she hung it in her apartment and stored stuff in its innumerable pockets. It gave her a cylindrical, androgynous appearance that minimized unwanted attention. Oh, how she loved her jacket so! It would still be a dismal night. The jacket could only appease the cold, not erase it entirely. And if the recent weeks were any indication, wraiths would be few and far between. As if even they hated the weather. At least it wasn't snowing. Fargo by night had a post-apocalyptic vibe. Discarded husks of old trucks rusted at the side of dilapidated shacks. Everywhere lights flickered, streetlights, storefront lights, starlights. Nothing had any consistency. If all the lights turned off at once, the city itself might vanish from existence. She wrapped a hand around the soul gem in her pocket and kept her eyes open. In such a dark place, the black miasma that heralded wraiths could slip past a careless eye. When Sloan reached Fargo's central business district, as transient as the rest of the city, she heard a guttural murmur from behind the decrepit line of storefronts and hesitated. Her auditory senses weren't her most reliable quality, but the sound merited investigation nonetheless. She shuffled along the brick facade of a shop until she found a crevice alleyway and flattened herself sideways to pass through. By the time she had reached the end of the alley, she knew she had prey. The ghoulish moans were inimitable by anything but a wraith. She grabbed the edge of the wall and peeked out at the trash-strewn lot behind the stores, the kind of place nobody went even during the day, enclosed by barbed wire fence and a flurry of no trespassing signs. In the center of a grainy plume of shadow stood what could be taken as a tall and grey man swaddled in a vaguely Buddhist robe. The bald, shriveled head extending from the elongated torso had no real face. A frenzy of static and glitches swallowed its features, a melange of pixelated terror that belied the inhumanity of the otherwise humanoid appearance. Sloan sighed. A lesser wraith, small potatoes. She didn't have the luxury of complaint given her circumstances. She unleashed the magic from her soul gem to transform into her magical girl attire, which meant little aesthetically because she continued to wear her large brown jacket over it. It was too damn cold to traipse in a miniskirt. The plan: eliminate the target while expending as little magic as possible. She wasted no time materializing her weapon, a large machine gun with a long, Gatling-style barrel. She held the heavy turret at her hip, although it tipped her somewhat off balance. With magic she could lighten the gun or have it levitate by her side or something spectacular, but who gave a shit? She took aim and readied to fire as the wraith turned toward her. Something leapt from the roof of the nearest building and somersaulted at the wraith with superfluous acrobatic pizzazz, emerging from its self-indulgence at just the right moment to strike the wraith over the head with a curved scimitar. The wraith reared back as its assailant stuck the landing and readied a quick second strike that would surely finish its intended target. Sloan rammed the other magical girl out of the way and hoisted her machine gun to bludgeon the wraith herself. But it had been a long time since she had been so active in combat and she misjudged the weight of her own weapon, only raising it halfway before losing her balance and tottering forward helplessly. The wounded wraith fled, oozing through the barbed wire fence and into a sprawling snowfield beyond. While Sloan recouped herself, the other magical girl took off in hot pursuit. She cleared the fence in a single bound and sprinted atop the snow. Sloan gritted her teeth and swung her turret around, hardly taking time to steady herself as she squeezed the trigger. The machine gun churned as it loosed thousands of luminescent bolts into the field, blasting the barbed wire to smithereens and eviscerating the landscape. The ground spewed puffs of white powder as Sloan planted her back foot and sprayed round after round, indeterminate toward what she aimed for and what she hit. A spasm of pain stung deep in her forehead. She cut off her magic at once and clutched her skull. Her gun stopped, although the turret continued to spin with a mechanical whir. Shit. She had used too much. Sloan discarded her gun and staggered into the tattered war zone she had created. She had to have hit the wraith. For as much magic as she used, if she didn't hit it. 4 small black cubes sat in the snow, a malevolent aura quickly dissipating around them. Sloan fell to her knees before the spoils and scooped them up with a fistful of snow. For so weak a wraith, it was a decent drop. The tip of something sharp settled on her shoulder. I suggest you fork over what I'm due. Sloan struggled to her feet and faced the other magical girl. She was a ragged thing, a Valkyrie from a dying empire. Vestiges of a typical magical girl costume clung to her, threads frayed at the edges and what looked like handmade stitchwork on the collar. Her gaunt and worn face expelled breath in a pasty cloud. You aren't due anything, said Sloan. I landed the first strike, said the other. And I'd have finished it myself if not for you. She wiped her nose with the back of a dainty glove. Look kid, said Sloan. I dunno who you are or where you come from, but Fargo's my territory. The kid moved the tip of her sword from Sloan's shoulder to her throat. I ain't fucking around. The cubes, please. You can keep the city, like I'd want this dung heap. Sloan rehearsed the actions it would take to disarm her opponent. Knock the sword out of the way with one hand and blast her in the face with the other. The kid was an obvious novice, evidenced by everything from her stance to her language. In a fair fight Sloan won every time. But the pain in her skull lingered and a desperate fatigue swept her. Her magic was low. Dangerously low. With a grudging sigh Sloan opened her hand, all 4 cubes perched on the upturned palm. The kid ogled them a moment and then carefully picked out 2. "Take them all," said Sloan. "You idiot. Take all 4. "This is fair," said the kid. "You got the finishing shot, after all." The kid backed away, pointing her sword at Sloan with one hand and clutching the cubes to her chest with the other. "Don't worry about seeing me again. I'm moving up in the world. A landfill like this is no place for me." She turned and ran into the darkness. Sloan sagged to her knees and let her soul gem roll onto the ground, awash in a putrid splotch of brown. She placed the 2 cubes beside it and let them do their work. That stupid kid. Only taking 2 cubes, when she had right to them all. If she didn't learn, she wouldn't last. Corruption streamed from her soul gem and osmosed into the cubes. Only a few seconds and the cubes refused to cleanse anymore. Her soul gem remained mud brown. Closing her eyes, she cupped her hands around the soul gem and leaned her head close. "It's okay," she said. "You're alive." She spoke as if to the gem rather than herself. Although the gem was herself, technically. Her soul, if you got metaphysical about it. "You had a bad night but tomorrow will be better. You survived worse than this, so you'll survive this too. It's okay." She kissed her soul gem and opened her eyes. It looked slightly less brown, she was sure of it. She tried not to think how frequent her pep talks were getting. When she recovered enough to look up, she found herself staring into 2 emotionless red eyes attached to a sickeningly cute cat thing that blended into the snow perfectly. Its tail flicked back and forth. "The girl who escaped has far less potential than you," said Kyubey, that Mephistopheles of adolescent girls the world round. He spoke via telepathy, his face never moved. "I'm surprised you were unable to control the situation." "I was tired." Sloan pushed herself upright. She kicked the spent cubes at him and let him eat them with the weird alien mouth on his back. Sliding her soul gem into a pocket, she wrapped her coat tighter around herself and headed the way she came. Kyubey trotted alongside her. How unfortunate that such a promising magical girl has resolved herself to this fate. At full capacity, your prowess and expertise would allow you to reliably fight wraiths in even a large city. She climbed through the broken fence. "You have your cubes. Why are you still talking to me?" Her discarded machine gun vanished with a wave of her hand. "It's important I keep an eye on the mental health of promising contractees. It would be inefficient if I let a useful prospect disappear before extracting as much as possible from her." "You already have a pretty good grasp on my mental health. Gonna ask me about Minneapolis next?" "I didn't plan to bring it up if you didn't first," said Kyubey. "But you may find it of interest that your replacement, Miss Ibsen, is managing the city adequately." Sloan stopped in front of the alley back to the main street of Fargo and sighed. "You're not even trying to be subtle, are you?" With one deft movement she grabbed Kyubey and drop-kicked him. His ragdoll body soared skyward in a series of mid-air contortions, the expressionless red eyes betraying no surprise or discomposure as he disappeared over the roof of a building. Sloan clapped her hands and laughed. That felt good. He was normally so surreptitious with her she forgot the catharsis of obliterating his adorable body. She headed home. Her second-story apartment overlooked a liquor store and a video rental joint, both advertising their wares with neon signs that pierced her curtains and drove her crazy when she tried to sleep. She closed the door behind her and tromped her boots dry, flopping onto her mattress and pulling them off one after another. She kept her coat on. Heat wasn't cheap. She shook her cereal boxes to find one that wasn't empty. Corn flakes. It would do. Shoveling handfuls into her mouth, she pored over the nutrition facts on the side of the box. Kyubey tapped her window. "May I come in?" "Are you like a vampire, you can only come in if I let you? Would explain a lot." The rat bastard pushed open the window and slithered inside. "It's merely a formality based on human ideals of etiquette. Speaking of which, it was rude of you to kick me." "Boo-hoo." Sloane's cornflakes went extinct and she tossed the box aside to save the crumbs for later. She had figured she hadn't seen the last of Kyubey after she kicked him. If he wanted to talk, he wanted to talk. And since he had opened their conversation with every obvious way to butter/rile her up, he probably wanted something from her. Let's cut to the chase, yeah? I could use some shut-eye. Kyubey stared at her from the center of the room. I have an opportunity for you, Sloan. She fell back on her mattress. Not interested. That was easy. It's in your best interest to listen to what I have to tell you. Yes, Kyubey, you sure know what's in my best interest. I believe that. You made a compelling case for yourself with that whole contract bit. His face remained ever fixed. Are you unhappy with being a magical girl, Sloan? Or are you unhappy that you were ousted from Minneapolis? She counted cracks on the ceiling. Hurry up and tell me this opportunity of yours, Cue-ball. Of course. I am offering you the opportunity to reclaim your territory of Minneapolis. Wham! If the satanic hamster wanted her attention, he should have opened with that. Tell him no. It's Kyubey. You can't trust him. Tell him no. She opened her mouth to form the word and closed it without saying a thing. He already had her soul, what more could he steal from her? What did she have to steal that was worth more than a chance to return to Minneapolis and smash Claire Ibsen in her pockmarked face? Was that not the dream that had sustained her through so many frigid Fargo nights? No, she couldn't trust Kyubey. How could she? He was the one thing in the universe that had screwed her worse than Claire had. But was that even true? His previous question resonated in her mind, which made her more unhappy. Being a magical girl, or eking a miserable existence in godforsaken Fargo. You claimed earlier Claire was managing the city fine. Why would you want her terminated? I have no particular interest who controls the territory of Minneapolis, Claire Ibsen, or Sloan Redfearn. You are both competent magical girls suited for a task of that magnitude. Sloan closed her eyes. You're being roundabout. I don't like it. What do you want me to do? There is a town west of here where your species has discovered a primitive energy source. This discovery has caused a rapid population explosion as workers migrate in search of financial gain. A town to the west. Maybe the same town the man at the convenience store had mentioned. More people means more wraiths. Not simply more people. Boomtowns are rare but remarkable phenomena in human history. They are locations of lawlessness, corruption, and sin. The unrealistic hopes of the migrants, once confronted by the stark realities of the situation, create immense quantities of despair. In effect, a perfect storm of wraith production. You must have loved the California gold rush, said Sloan. She peeled herself off the mattress and shuffled to her closet-sized bathroom. No. Historically, these events cannot be properly harvested. Boom regions have low populations of young human females, and thus low supplies of contractees relative to demand. Furthermore, established magical girls can rarely be persuaded to abandon their territories for distant prospects. As such, the immense energy potential of these events usually goes to waste. Sloan ran her toothbrush under the faucet. Her roll of paste was coiled to the cap. But this time, you happen to have a competent magical girl not far from the site. A girl with little attachment to her current territory and who you perceive has nothing to lose from embarking on such a venture. Exactly. How convenient. What's this got to do with Minneapolis? The cubes dropped by wraiths are mutually beneficial as an energy source for us both. Your power is limited immensely by your sullied soul gem. The sparse drops in Fargo have done nothing to alleviate the despair you've struggled against ever since your duel with Miss Ibsen in Minneapolis. When was that? 7 months ago? She finished brushing and spat into the sink. Something like that. But if you were to acquire a significant quantity of cubes at once, you could restore your soul gem to peak condition and then some. You would then be able to contest Miss Ibsen to reclaim control of your home city. You would enjoy that, would you not? I believe that chance is a more than suitable reward for your services in Williston. Her reflection peered at her from behind a dirty mirror. She ran a hand through her hair, the fingers snagging on knot after knot. It's a sour deal for me. I risk my life to help you, and in return you merely allow me to try to do something I might possibly want to do. You're not actually giving me anything. I didn't say it was a trade. I said it was an opportunity. A shitty one, said Sloan. You need to purify your soul gem to have any hope of defeating Claire Ibsen in combat. If that isn't your goal, why are you even still alive? For a time she said nothing, and when she finally left the bathroom, Kyubey had gone. She didn't trust him, of course. No doubt he had kept cards off the table, and his abrupt departure was a tactical move to prevent her from asking too many questions. At least he had been straightforward enough to admit his aim was nothing more than to use her. A nest of wraiths in a remote locale. She wondered if at her current strength she could even handle them. Not that things would improve if she stayed in Fargo. Maybe Kyubey's deception was that he had no expectation of her survival. Maybe all he wanted was to squeeze as much energy out of her as possible before her long-awaited and ignominious end. Maybe he should have framed his so-called opportunity as a choice between a slow death in Fargo and a quick one in, what was the name, Williston. Maybe. She hit the switch and climbed onto her mattress, unbuttoning her coat and draping it over her body like a blanket, folding her knees to keep her toes from poking from the hem. Trying to uncoil the mysteries of Kyubey's freakish multitudinous mind would lead nowhere. She had to reframe his terms in her own language and decide independently of his theoretical posturing. She slid her soul gem out her coat and placed it on the floor beside her. It swallowed the dim light from outside into its filthy core. Kyubey knew his business. He had not appeared exactly when he did by pure chance. Everything about this opportunity reeked of his trademark manipulation and half-truths. It wasn't a question of deceiving her. It was a question of whether she were desperate enough to have no choice. The next morning Sloan found a roadmap and looked up Williston. It was about as far as you could get from Fargo and still be in North Dakota. She would have to hitchhike. Leaving Fargo for even a week meant abandoning her job, her apartment, her territory. Some kid like the girl she met yesterday would swoop in before she even crossed the city line. Well, whoever it was, they probably deserved it. Into a backpack that had survived 3 years of high school and a half year of destitution, she loaded the things she still owned, mostly clothes. She finished off her cereal and left the boxes and the mattress for her landlord to deal with. One way or another, she would never return to this town. At least she had that certainty to nourish a little hope. Westbound on I-94, she extended an arm and stuck up a thumb, applying her best girlish smile to attract the lampreys. They must have had some instinctual notion of her, because it took 37 passing vehicles and trickle-down traffic before one stopped. "Where you headed, miss?" said the featureless man behind the wheel of a no-brand pickup. He tipped his cap and manifested a smile from his doughy face. "Williston," Sloan said. "I can take you far as Bismarck. That all right?" "Fine." The truck smelled of ash. She stared out the window at the same dem field and the same dem barbed wire fence that spanned the entire state and probably a few other states as well. One perfect flat horizon over which hovered a gray sky. The occasional pump jack loomed in the distance like a discarded brachiosaur. The driver tried to spark small talk, but months behind a cash register made her decent enough at dodging it. "What's her name?" "Sloan." "Where's she from?" "Minneapolis." "She old enough to be on her own?" "Yep." "Could be dangerous, a girl like her out here." "Yep." 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 When the humans went quiet, the radio said, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me." She listened an hour before they reached Bismarck, the state capital. She thanked the man and stepped into a city of even more marginal squalor than Fargo. She wondered if any magical girl bothered to come here. Surely someone. Those with nowhere else to go. A sign downtown advertised bus service to Minot, Dickinson, and Williston. A large group of men gathered around the sign, all in the same plaid shirt with the same faded baseball cap, wearing the same pensive expression with their arms folded the same way as they chewed the same tobacco or the same toothpick or the same cigarette. She dawdled behind them as they migrated en masse to the address on the sign. The address belonged to a bus station. 3 or 4 buses that looked made out of aluminum were bunched under a precarious awning. Into one bus filed a line of plaid-shirted men, heads stooped as one by one they vanished through the folding door. A destination was plastered on the side of each bus. An immense crowd had formed around the ticket booth, manned by a sole secretary who pantomimed prices to embittered masses from behind her plate glass. Sloan gravitated toward the booth, lingering at the outer boundaries of the clod of men jockeying for tickets. It would cost less to hitchhike, but given how long it had taken for her to get a ride the first time, she didn't trust her odds. If she failed to reach Williston by sundown, it would be a damn cold night. The thicket of plaid and denim refused to part for her, so she bumped against it listlessly, muttering "excuse me" and "pardon me" every so often, only to go unheard by the faceless mob. She was circumnavigating the crowd in search of an entryway when she noticed someone in the crowd who did not fit in. It was a young girl, teenage. Short, dark-haired, mousy, a conservative little house on the prairie outfit buttoned up her neck. Anxious pupils flickered behind round glasses. She stood at the periphery of the crowd, cowering in the shadow of the awning like a refugee from a bygone century. Sloan scanned the girl's hands. A plain metal ring on the middle finger, the telltale sign of a magical girl. So Sloan wasn't the only girl the rat bastard had finagled into his get-rich-quick scheme. He should know by now she didn't play well with others. Quiet and inconspicuous, Sloan approached the girl. She weaved between the men with her hands in her pockets, although she didn't wear her own soul gem as a ring since jewelry tended to inspire burglaries. The dark-haired girl didn't notice her, didn't seem to notice much at all as she stared at a great beyond, her mouth slightly agape and murmuring to herself. Sloan slinked into striking distance and lashed out her hand, seizing the other girl's and shaking it voraciously. "Hey kid, you look a little lost. Where you from?" The girl gasped. Mortification spread over her face. She reared back, banging into a metal buttress and jerking her hand away, although Sloan kept her grip firmly rooted. Sloan was at least a head taller than the other magical girl, and if she could make an impression she might scare her off without resorting to fisticuffs. "You from here?" "Bismarck," said Sloan. "What's your name?" The girl disappeared. Sloan blinked and released her handshake, realizing she was holding nothing at all. She looked around, but there was no sign of the girl anywhere. She had completely vanished, like a mirage or an illusion. Well shit. That complicated matters somewhat. It cost more than she expected for a ticket, but she had already wasted too much time, so she succumbed to sunk cost fallacy and coughed up a good chunk of her savings. It was mid-afternoon by the time she filed into line for the bus, managing to shoulder her way near the front so she could get prime seating. The sole female in a line of stooped-shouldered men, she flashed her ticket at the driver, who ushered her onward with an ambivalent nod. She pulled her way through the rows toward the back. Everything in the bus was metal and glass, no cushions, no carpet. Those who had entered before her sat with eyes fixed between feet, iron titans in exodus from the city of the Iron Chancellor. In the very back seat was the dark-haired girl, her forehead pressed against the window. Sloan didn't hesitate. She clomped forward and slid onto the seat next to her. The girl saw her coming and disappeared like before, but Sloan was prepared. She leaned aggressively at the spot the girl had occupied moments before and planted a hand against the window, sealing her into the corner. Yes, she was still there. Invisible but still there, Sloan could feel the tiny heartbeat quicken its pace as she pressed against her prey. Sloan spoke telepathically. "Nice Houdini trick, kid. Where'd you learn it?" No response. "Aw, come on, don't be shy. I ain't gonna hurt you. Now come on and reappear so I don't look like an asshole, yeah?" The line of men sluiced in behind her, taking seats around them. They did not seem to notice Sloane's odd position around what to them must look like empty space. "Come on kid, gimme something. A name at least?" "Oh, Omaha." Even via telepathy it came out as a stammered whisper. "Omaha, eh? Well, I'm Fargo. Nice to meet you. Now let's get friendly because it's gonna be a long ride." She held her hand to shake, making her appearance to the casual onlooker even more awkward. The girl called Omaha said nothing and did not reappear. Sloane's hand hung idly. Something clamped down between the thumb and pointer. Sloane's flesh ripped open as a ring of shark teeth tore through the skin, causing a bloody red mark to manifest as if by demonic possession. Sloane gritted her teeth to stop from shouting the immense fuck building on the tip of her tongue and pulled back to break the bite. The teeth left her skin. An instant later the bus window flew open. Sloane swept her good hand only to swat harmlessly against a leg as the invisible Omaha flung herself out the window. Omaha plopped onto the tarmac and clip-clopped away, small footprints emerging from the dust in her wake. Sloane pressed her bleeding hand into her coat. Where the fuck even was Omaha? Wasn't that Kansas or some shit? No, Nebraska. That really was a long way away, but of course Kyubey probably had to search far and wide to scrounge up a loony of such premium caliber. Speaking of the devil. As she lost sight of Omaha's footprints exiting stage left, she caught a glimpse of the rat bastard himself watching her from a bench near the end of the station, as motionless as a small statue. "Fuck you," she said with matching hand gesture. The bus pulled out the station. Chapter 2, Dappled Things. A caravan progressed toward the town, station wagons and pickups and semi-trailers and sedans overloaded with earthly possessions of the anonymous men riding one by one into the waiting maw of Williston. Sloan could tell even from afar, and even in the waning sun it was a wraith pandemonium, the miasma so thick it swallowed the town's entire outward existence with an aura of malevolence. Beyond vague edges and obscure corners the only thing left uneaten was a clock tower that jutted above the black canopy, salvaging a vestige of the real world from the unreality consuming it. Sloan sat upright and fingered the soul gem in her coat. Kyubey had told her it was bad, but this transcended bad. Try abominable. Try cataclysmic. Her bus lumbered undeterred into the miasma. Its sterile steel interior became instantly coated in a dark grime. Sloan stood and sidled past the hunchbacked man beside her into the aisle. As she pulled her way to the front, the bus driver turned her head. "Please sit down, we will arrive shortly." "I need off now," said Sloan. "Please sit down, we will arrive shortly. Please sit down, we will arrive shortly. Please sit down." The driver's eyes were glazed and unresponsive. Typical human behavior upon entering a miasma. The confines of the bus offered no mobility, no escape. In the tinted windows emerged faces of lesser wraiths, hundreds of them clustered together, fighting for a look at the fresh blood. Their moans reverberated through the bus as their faces began to phase through the glass. Sloan unleashed her magic. Her magical girl uniform manifested beneath her brown overcoat. Her machine gun materialized in her hands, forcing her to lean to keep it from clattering against the seats in the aisle or the slumped riders with their foreheads nearly between their knees. Monstrous claws groped through the walls. She slung the machine gun around, lifting it high over seats with partially magical effort. She blasted the back window of the bus to shards in a single ripple of pale light, sprinted down the aisle, cartwheeled through the shattered window, and landed on her feet in the middle of the road. The glut of wraiths oozed after her, bunched up the exact way she liked it. Judging from her fight the day before, she didn't have much magic to spare, so she had to make it count. She hoisted the machine gun at her hip, took aim, and a car crashed into her from behind. The breath rushed out her mouth and her gun hurtled out her hands. The back of her skull cracked something hard before she bounced off it and hit the ground, rolling aside to escape being flattened as the car continued like the driver had not noticed he hit something. She landed on all fours, dazed and disoriented, scanning for her gun and locating it not far from her. She reached, but space seemed to distort around her arm, expanding the distance to the gun exponentially. A hideous cackle pierced her ears as the wraiths unhinged their jaws in unison to laugh at her useless form on the asphalt. "Fuck you all," she said. Focusing her energy, she raised her hand. Her machine gun trembled and rose as well, levitating by invisible puppet string. The pain in her skull stirred and she braced for a lot worse as she pointed at the wraiths to guide her disembodied weaponry's sights. The gun fired. A surge of light shredded through the thick cluster of wraiths. The collective laugh turned to a screech as the wraiths disintegrated en masse, ripped into sizzling bits that drifted in the air like ash after a fire. Those spared the initial blast scattered and dispersed from the gunfire. Her pain built to an unbearable pitch and she dropped her hand with an anguished scream. The gun smashed to the ground. She clutched her temples as the pain built and bloomed and burgeoned into a frenzied scorpion in her skull, raging its barbed tail against her brain, ripping at grey matter with its twin talons. She cut off all magic, reverted to her civilian outfit, but it did nothing to mollify the beast. She had overdone it. Death loomed. No. The slaughtered wraiths must have dropped cubes. She only needed a handful. Howling in agony, she shuffled forward on her elbows, her legs twisting and struggling behind her as she pushed her body deeper to where a sporadic supply of granular cubes lay blinking. She reached for them, her hand and the cubes trembling both, and with a single solid swipe clenched more than she had held in her entire 7 months in Fargo. She mashed the whole handful against her soul gem, as if the closer they were the faster they would work. Small streams of grief flitted out, blending perfectly with the miasma. From every direction at once arose a singular cackle. Sloan looked up. All around her more wraiths had emerged. Many more than the initial assault, an unbroken tide of them, in the street, on the squat structures, inside the passing cars. The front ranks were comprised solely of lesser wraiths, but behind them Sloan could make out much larger creatures with true forms obscured in shadow. Her mind word for a plan, an action, a defense, an evasion, anything. All that appeared was blankness. Her soul was shot to fuck. She sucked at barriers and diversions. Pure, unadulterated offense was her game, and if something levied a shot in her direction, her best bet was to jump. They had her surrounded on at least 8 sides. She had nowhere to jump. The robes of the wraiths began to billow, and the static consuming their faces went ballistic as they charged a collective attack. A reverse panopticon of thick grey beams fired from their bosoms and raced to skewer her from every angle at once. Around her sprung a translucent red bubble that appeared so suddenly she thought at first death really was like video games, where the screen froze red with the words game over plastered across it. The folly subsided as she realized someone had placed a barrier around her. The beams of the wraiths bounced back as the bubble throbbed and undulated with a series of wet slaps. Her first thought was Miss Maladjusted from the bus. But the magical girl that bounded beside her and extended a hand looked nothing like the invisible Omaha girl. The sanguine bubble cast a fiery glaze over her, but beyond that she wore a saccharine complexion with both gown and hair flowing behind her in an imaginary breeze. She clasped a ruby-studded scepter and wore her soul gem as a brooch on her shoulder. "Can you walk, love?" Sloan pushed herself upright. "I'm fine." "Let's not mince words, then," said the girl. "I can only hold the barrier so long. When it pops, we need to run. Be a dear and watch my back, will you?" "I'm ready whenever," said Sloan. She shoved both soul gem and cubes into her coat and retrieved her gun. Power ebbed back to her. The other girl snapped her fingers and the bubble popped, plunging them into the dark. The wraiths screeched again and fired more beams, but the girls were already running. Bubble Girl led the way toward the exit, using her staff to ward away the wraiths that had flanked them. Her chief method of attack seemed to be to spray a barrage of small red bubbles from the end of the staff, which Sloan normally would have found hilarious. Instead, she levied suppressive fire into the horde at their heels, targeting the wraiths preparing to attack and leaping backward with each step to keep with the long-legged sprint of her companion. The end of the miasma hovered in the distance, light from the real world filtering through and extinguishing immediately. Sloan blasted back one column of wraiths only for another to advance immediately. She swiveled her turret to fire, but they moved quicker, erupting forth with more death beams. Sloan prepared to dodge only for another red bubble to zip in front of her and balloon into a massive sphere, catching and reflecting the beams before popping in a splash of crimson liquid. As soon as the bubble vanished, Sloan decimated the wraiths that had attacked. The wraiths slowed as the miasma thinned around them. A few more steps and they broke free from its wispy tendrils and re-emerged in a world of ground and sky. The infinite line of vehicles continued its advance into the darkness, each bus and station wagon in turn swallowed by the mist. Around them settled small flakes of snow. Sloan and the other girl returned to their street outfits, the other girl wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans. She let out a long sigh. "Phew. Nothing like some exercise to get you ready for dinner." She reached out a hand and jostled Sloan's shoulder as Sloan doubled over for breath. "Yeah, thanks," said Sloan. The other girl stretched her arms and yawned. "Too bad I only have snacks. Let's go to camp and sort things out." She realized something and held up a finger. "Oh, yes. I'm Delaney Pollock. What's your name, love?" Sloan scrutinized Delaney. She had introduced herself by her real name, not quite standard procedure for magical girls on first acquaintance. "Sloan Redfearn." Delaney Pollock marched away from the road, waving to a passing bus from which stared a chain gang of plaid-shirt men. Sloan followed, not having much else to do. "Sloan Redfearn, what a pretty name," said Delaney. "You must be the girl from Fargo. Kyubey told me all about you." As soon as she mentioned his name, Kyubey poked his head out of the pouch of Delaney's sweatshirt and grinned at Sloan with his expressionless expression. "Funny," said Sloan. "He didn't mention you at all." "It was considered highly unlikely you would agree to come if you knew others were enlisted as well," said Kyubey. "You don't know that," said Sloan. "The probability was not in your favor." Delaney led her through a gap in a fence and into a weedy field. Ahead stretched an expanse of badlands. Sloan wondered where they were even going. "In my experience," Delaney said, "Kyubey generally knows what he's talking about. You should thank him anyway, since if not for him I wouldn't have known to go rescue you. Nice of him to tell you to help me out. Might have been easier if he warned me not to go in to begin with." "I dislike spending unnecessary time near you," considering your propensity to destroy my bodies with such caprice. They pushed through the stalks of grass and followed an embankment down to a muddy, half-frozen creek, across which stretched a small wormwood bridge. On the other side was a jeep covered with a camouflaged tarp. "Careful on the bridge," said Delaney. "It's none too sturdy." It creaked but held. Delaney pulled the tarp aside and unlocked the jeep, depositing Kyubey onto the passenger seat before ushering him aside to sit herself. Sloan took note of the license plate, since Delaney had failed to mention where she was from. Saskatchewan. "You're from Canada. Is that something you care about?" asked Delaney, with a note of legitimate concern that verged on condescension. "If it really matters, my territory spans the cities of Regina and Saskatoon. I doubt you've heard of either. Don't be shy, take a seat. I won't bite." Sloan circled the jeep before sliding into the back seat. She didn't much feel like sitting after the long bus ride and the previous excitement, especially now that the cubes had worked their magic. She pulled them out her pocket and arranged them around her soul gem, although they had ceased absorbing more grief. Her gem remained dark, but better than before. "What the hell," said Sloan, as Kyubey scampered up to her and devoured the cubes with his back. "There's more than enough here to have drained the whole thing." Delaney pushed her seat back and cast a glance over her shoulder. "The soul gems are attuned to the emotional state of their owner. Some people require a certain amount of grief to continue functioning, and even if that grief is removed via magical means, they will produce more immediately to fill the void. Perhaps you are one of those people, Sloan." She balanced her own soul gem on her upturned palm, tossed it into the air, and caught it with her other hand. Despite the magic she had expended during the fight, it was a nearly pure shade of red. "Kyubey told me I could get enough cubes here to purify my soul gem," said Sloan. "That's true. The potential rewards here are so great even your permanent state of despair can be cured. In fact, this is really your only chance of survival." "See?" Delaney scooped up the rat bastard and gave him a nice hug. "Kyubey has our best interests at heart, even when it doesn't always seem like it. I'll admit, when I first heard you were coming, I had doubts. Girls on the brink of despair can be so difficult, you know? But seeing your offensive capabilities, I believe you'll fit into the team quite nicely." "Just because you helped me doesn't mean I'm part of your team." "Love, I didn't help you, I saved your life." Delaney opened the glove box, where a crumpled bag of chips awaited. "So don't go all rough and tumble lone wolf on me, I'll have to deal with enough of that from our third compatriot. You saw firsthand what awaits you in the miasma. Either we work together or we go home in body bags." Yeah. Sloan didn't want to admit it, but she didn't know if she could take so many wraiths solo even at full strength. "Kyubey usually discourages magical girls working together." "I admit the risk of magical girls succumbing to infighting is particularly high, but this is a special case. Besides, instances of magical girls successfully working together are not unheard of. In Metakiera, Japan, there is the example of..." "We're a long way from Japan," said Sloan. "Besides, the third member of this supposed team is not someone I want to work with." Delaney shook her bag of chips but only crumbs fell out. "Third member? You met Winnipeg already? That doesn't make sense, she shouldn't be here for a few more hours." "Winnipeg?" said Sloan. "She said her name was Omaha. Look what she did to my hand." She held up the bitten hand. The blood had clotted in a scab ring between her thumb and forefinger. Delaney laughed and waved her own hand over the wound, healing it completely. "The girl from Omaha was not invited to be part of your team," said Kyubey. "I found her presence at the bus station as interesting as you did, Sloan." Sloan turned over her healed hand. "I doubt that. Especially since you being surprised by something is pretty rare." "As you may expect, her unique power can make her difficult to keep a close eye on." "Unique power?" Delaney crumpled the chips bag and tossed it back in the glove box. "She can disappear at will, at least from what I saw," said Sloan. "I scared her off the bus. Maybe she decided to go home." Although she doubted it. A girl heading here all the way from Omaha must be at least as desperate as Sloan herself. And the whole hand-biting spiel pointed to some serious derangement. Delaney shuffled through the glove box but found nothing else to eat. A thin layer of snow had built on the windshield, instilling the jeep with a heavy chill. Sloan wrapped her coat tight around herself. "Well, I'm not worried about any fourth girl," said Delaney. "She may even be useful as a diversion. This strategic talk bores me anyway, since I'll have to repeat everything once Winnipeg arrives. She turned in her seat and leaned her head uncomfortably close to Sloan, gripping her headrest. I have the impression we've gotten off on the wrong foot, Sloan. You probably think I'm totally full of myself, right? Nothing I haven't dealt with before. I swear I'm not a bad person, said Delaney. Plus, if we get to know each other, we'll work better as a unit. Which will be critical to our success. Trust me. I've done this before, and with a bunch of girls who would not stop squabbling over the pettiest things. It was so unfun. I'd rather take a nap, said Sloan. I'll play ball with you and this Winnipeg chick. But I'm here for one reason only, and it's to snag enough cubes to cleanse my soul gem. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Delaney Pollock with the bubble magic. Of course, wimpy magic wasn't a reason to let her guard down. Claire Ibsen back in Minneapolis had a pretty lame power, too. The one thing Sloan knew, the one thing she could not afford to forget, was that magical girls were either greedy, selfish, opportunistic bitches or else dead before their next period. Maybe Delaney was in the latter category, as she had that naive affection for Kyubey that usually signaled a novice. Or maybe the nice girl act was just that. An act. For the next 2 hours, she pretended to sleep while Delaney cradled Kyubey in her arms and cooed to him under her breath. By the time Delaney's cell phone spazzed with the first few notes of last year's earworm pop sensation, night had fallen in earnest and the temperature went sub-zero. Snow caked the Jeep, but at no point had Delaney turned the ignition to run the heater. She answered the phone. Hi. Delaney Pollock speaking, how may I be of assistance? A muffled voice twittered on the other end. Of course, we'll be right there. She closed the phone and snapped her fingers at Sloan. Winnipeg's arrived. Let's give her a nice warm welcome, all right. Sloan rubbed her eyes and forced a fake yawn. You two know each other? Not quite. Delaney climbed out the Jeep, allowing Kyubey to scamper into the pouch of her hoodie. Our territories border each other. Occasionally we come into contact. That's all. Good, thought Sloan. She didn't want the Canadians teaming up on her, either in combat or group power dynamics. Dear Lord, group power dynamics? She remembered why she hated working with others. They tromped up the embankment and into the field, now blanketed in snow. A million stars glittered overhead. Sloan couldn't see far in front of her, but there wasn't much to see. When we meet Winnipeg, said Delaney, she'll say a lot of things you may not like. I recommend to grin and bear it. Try not to be confrontational. Just because she says something, doesn't mean it's the truth. Try to speak as little as possible. Why should I let her walk all over me? Because she'll kick your ass, love. The road and the town emerged into view. The road remained illuminated by the headlights of the endless parade entering the town, but the miasma at night was somehow darker than the night itself. The top of the clock tower hung suspended above the black cloud, its face awash in a dull glow. Sloan had failed to notice before, but the clock no longer worked. Its hands were frozen on the 12 and 6. On the side of the road, near the edge of the miasma, stood a small figure. With each passing vehicle, the figure was bathed in the headlights, her shadow dancing on the ground although she herself made no movement at all. Sloan didn't need Delaney to tell her who the figure was, but she did anyway with a sing-song chime. That's Winnipeg. Winnipeg, unmoving, waited for them to trudge the whole damn way to her. She was a short girl, younger than either of them, with the pugnacious stance of a pubescent who owed the world nothing. Her short, boyish hair and bilious profusion of freckles only made ridiculous the intense glare she levied at Sloan and Delaney as they approached. She already wore magical girl garb, a no-nonsense long-necked lavender vest with miniskirt and matching stockings which went so high up her twig-like legs they might as well have been pants. She held a gleaming katana that was as tall as she was. Sloan and Delaney moseyed up, Sloan with hands in pockets and shoulders slouched. The munchkin didn't even need to speak for Sloan to know she wouldn't like her. Hello, Winnipeg. Delaney gave a cordial wave. I'm glad you could make it. Regina Saskatoon, said Winnipeg. Sloan thought she was speaking Sioux or something, but Delaney responded to it with a bashful smile. Please, you can leave it at just Regina, said Delaney. The full title sounds so silly, I can hardly bear it. You possess both cities, do you not? Said Winnipeg. Her staunch stance did not waver, although both Delaney and Sloan towered over her. Take pride in your accomplishments, woman. You earned your lands through your own prowess. If you now wish to disown one of them, perhaps I myself should seize it instead. Delaney rubbed the back of her head and smiled. Regina Saskatoon it is, then. Winnipeg wheeled on Sloan, jabbing a finger at her chest. And you? Fargo. I was not aware that was a real place. I thought it was merely a movie. Yeah, well. I have zero faith in the ability of a woman who can only control such meager territory. Winnipeg sheathed her katana and folded her arms. Your appearance ill suits me as well. Sloan withheld a rebuttal involving Winnipeg's acne. I owned Minneapolis before Fargo. Yes, the rat informed me as much. Winnipeg indicated Kyubey, who was enjoying a stroking between the ears from Delaney. Your former holdings mean nothing to me. If you could not manage your lands, you do not deserve to use them as your name. As such, you remain Fargo. Not debating that, said Sloan. As for me. Winnipeg lifted her chin. Nominally, I am Winnipeg. Other than a few northern sections, my effective territory encompasses the whole of Manitoba, as well as some northern counties of Dakota and Minnesota and an eastern stretch of Saskatchewan. In terms of territory alone, I am the most powerful magical girl in central Canada and assuredly more powerful than either of you. As such, I shall be the leader of this party. While the rat has informed me that Regina Saskatoon is something of a specialist in the subject of wraith infestations, her expertise shall manifest itself solely as supplementary advice, upon which it is my decision whether to act. The other, Fargo, shall have no voice in tactical decisions and is be expected to follow my orders without question. After we have dispersed the infestation, the spoils in terms of grief cubes shall be distributed as such, 60% to me, 25% to Regina Saskatoon, and 15% to Fargo. The city of Williston and surrounding territory shall afterward fall under my jurisdiction and become part of the greater Winnipeg holding. No rewards in terms of either land or hunting rights shall be bestowed to Regina Saskatoon or Fargo. If either of you object to the terms as I have outlined them, you are welcome to challenge me to a duel to claim the right to leader. Am I understood? Of course, said Delaney. She gave Sloan a look. I didn't come all this way for a 15% take, said Sloan. Delaney stepped between her and Winnipeg and addressed the younger girl. That's fine. Fargo can have 5 of my percent, so we both get 20. I think that's fair, right? If I cared about being fair, said Winnipeg, I wouldn't have divvied the numbers the way I did. I made quite clear to you both what contradicting my terms entailed. Are you prepared to fight? I'm not fighting for so stupid a reason, said Sloan. We each get a third of the spoils. Even that's a compromise on my part, since Kyubey promised it all to me. Now are we going to start talking strategy or are we going to stand in the snow like assholes? Winnipeg's katana flashed in front of her, gleaming with the passing headlights. She certainly had no qualms about how many plaid-shirt men saw her waving her blade of Otaka magic, although they were close enough to the miasma maybe they had all been stupefied anyway. Gutless coward. The kind of churlish knave who speaks but refuses to back her words. You have no right to question my authority, Fargo. A woman on the brink of despair, with nothing to lose. I stoop merely to abide your presence. And here you demand yet more. So she knew about the sorry state of Sloane's soul gem too? Damn, Kyubey had sold out all her secrets. Winnipeg's gem, strung from her neck, was of course spotless. Sloan really had no hope fighting her, even if Winnipeg turned out to be only a mediocre yet overinflated magical girl, which Sloan suspected was the case. Kid Napoleons like her always amassed a large swath of worthless land and strutted about as though it meant anything. During her stint in Minneapolis, Sloan had dealt with a girl from Duluth who claimed to control all of northern Minnesota. As if anyone else even wanted such a frostbitten wasteland. When the Duluth girl died not 2 months later to a routine wraith attack, Sloan had considered it grand karmic justice. She adjusted her jacket collar and looked away to signify non-confrontation. When we fight the wraiths, you'll agree I deserve more than 15%. Delaney gave an exaggerated sigh of relief. Winnipeg sheathed her sword. You made the right choice, Fargo. Keep making those choices or I will cut you to ribbons. Also, if you turn out to be as big a liability as I suspect, I will cut you to ribbons. I would rather stand on my own than with a coward behind me. With sweeping arms, Delaney attempted to finagle both of them away from the road and toward her jeep. No need for melodrama, I'm certain everyone involved will pull their weight. We all want success, after all. Now. Winnipeg drew her katana again, for like the 15th time. Poor girl couldn't keep it down. Now we end this ceaseless chatter and purge this city of wraiths. Yes, said Delaney. I think we should probably definitely formulate some kind of plan before charging in. The plan is simple, said Winnipeg. We enter. We cleave our way through the lesser ranks. We find the Archon. We kill the Archon. We collect our spoils. We return to our territories. Am I missing a step, Regina Saskatoon? Delaney cringed at the moniker. I mean, on a macro level, sure, those are the fundamentals, but I think you may possibly be underestimating a little the severity of the threat inside that miasma. What the hell is an Archon, said Sloan. The other girls both stared at her, Winnipeg in exasperation and Delaney wringing her hands. Sloan stared back, refusing to feel embarrassment. She had ruled a long time in a city larger than either of them had ever set foot in, and the word Archon was as foreign to her as Konichiwa. So you're not only weak, you're not only a coward, but you're also stupid, said Winnipeg. I don't know what an Archon is, sue me. Did you not ask the rat anything before coming here? Did you simply set forth on a grand adventure, completely unaware of what you were stumbling into? You may be desperate, but to forego a basic understanding of your situation is beyond foolish. Yeah, because asking Kyubey for information is such a fun and rewarding experience. Sloan brushed snow from her hair. Delaney stepped between them again. This is all the more reason why we should take some time to plan our attack before charging in willy-nilly, don't you agree? It would be best if you listened to Delaney's advice, said Kyubey. Nobody asked you, said Sloan and Winnipeg in unison. Kyubey added no further comment. Winnipeg sheathed her katana. Sloan guessed how long until she drew it again, estimates boiled down to seconds. The younger girl swept past Sloan with a wave of her arm. Very well. We shall waste time in order to make Fargo slightly less of a liability. I am enjoying this arrangement already. She marched into the field, despite having no way to know where to go. Chapter 3, The Garden of Earthly Delights. Delaney swept the snow from the hood of her jeep and flattened onto it a schematic map of Williston, cast in a red glaze with light from her staff. The edges of the decaying parchment kept curling until Sloan stuck out a hand to pin down a corner. Thank you, said Delaney. After some sniffing about, I managed to procure this map of the town. It's from the 90s, so there may be some inaccuracies, but overall it's a passable representation of what we'll see inside. I'd use my smartphone for a more recent depiction, but miasmas are notorious dead zones, so let's get used to the old-fashioned approach, yes. Even on paper the town looked like crap. A highway bifurcated the city diagonally. A slovenly cluster of smaller streets branched out in what approximated a grid. The map highlighted a main street, but other than a point ambiguously marked municipal building it displayed little of note. A few empty plots, a cemetery, an airstrip runway on the north end. A school. Winnipeg scrutinized the map and scowled. How does this help? Exit routes, for starters. Delaney traced her finger along the map. Marshland borders the town's southern and eastern fringes. If you need out, your best bet's to find the highway and follow it one direction or another. There will be no need for escape. Winnipeg made a trenchant motion with her hand. Our plan is to enter, exterminate the Archon, and dissipate the miasma. Still nobody said what's an Archon, said Sloan. Use contextual clues, imbecile. An Archon tops the Wraith hierarchy in terms of power. It manifests invasion-level miasmas like the one consuming this territory. Once we destroy it, the miasma will subside. Half the map sprang up and curled over. It's not simply a powerful wraith, said Delaney. With a frustrated sigh, she planted her staff in the ground so she could hold down the map with both hands. Most wraiths are literal personifications of human sin and despair. An Archon is a wraith born from such immense negative emotion, from sin so great, it has the ability to spawn its own wraiths regardless of the human population around it. Hard to believe Shittsville, North Dakota could muster enough sin for that, said Sloan. I spent years in Minneapolis and never even heard of one. It's exactly in places so removed from the familiar tedium of everyday society where the greatest despair occurs. Delaney closed her eyes with serene composure. Desert outposts in Afghanistan. Indigenous villages in the Amazon. Uncharted islands in the Sargasso. These are pointless, said Winnipeg. I was told we would discuss strategy, not wax poetic on the desolation of the human soul. Roused from her musings, Delaney ironed out the map again as she muttered vague affirmatives to Winnipeg's rebuke. Sloan still had suspicions. For starters, what made Delaney Pollock of Saskatchewan such an authority on a cryptozoological wraith subspecies absent from the common magical girl bestiary? Second, what the fuck kind of occult bullshit had Sloan wrapped herself up in?
Okay, yes, so strategy, said Delaney. There's a slight problem with whole dip in dip out plan, Winnipeg. So basically, the Archon won't be easy to find. It doesn't want to be found. It has total dominion over the miasma, so it'll contort and bend the spatial dimensions to conceal itself. Compound that with the sheer magnitude of lesser wraiths it'll chuck in our path, and wow. If we found the Archon on Expedition 1 it would be like, immaculate good fortune. And good fortune you don't see much in there.
Winnipeg kneaded her eye sockets and exhaled.
Fine. Tonight we cover this half.
She slapped her palm onto the map.
If the Archon isn't there, we sweep the other half tomorrow. I'm telling you, it's not quite that simple.
Delaney wrung her hands.
The Archon will adapt to our presence. The geography of that town may already have been completely rearranged since Sloan, Fargo's little misadventure. A strategy around where we raid the miasma with strike attacks before retreating will actually be counterproductive. Trust me, I know firsthand. You keep mentioning you know firsthand, said Sloan.
Delaney knows firsthand, Kyubey confirmed.
Yeah, now I trust it.
Without warning, Winnipeg drew her ninja sword and cleaved the map in two. Delaney dropped to her knees with a piteous shriek as the halves of the map fluttered down around her, revealing a long gash in the paint of her jeep's hood.
Enough, said Winnipeg. You tell me to discuss strategy, but mutter about shipwreck islands instead. You show me a map, only to inform me the geography has changed. You denigrate my plan of attack, but do not supply a replacement. I swiftly lose patience.
Delaney clutched the parchment to her chest.
You didn't need to do that.
Sloan wished she had a watch to check. It was too damn cold for aimless prattle. Besides, she was antsy to fight. So many wraiths meant so many cubes. Enough to cure the disease gnawing at her soul gem. Enough to restore her to full power. The moment that happened, sayonara Williston. She'd be on a one-way trip to Minneapolis, where she had a date with an old friend. Her two companions blabbed some more until Delaney finally reached the point.
We must establish a base inside the miasma. It's very important it's inside. The Archon has a tough time altering the dimensions of the miasma while a counteracting magical force, namely, us, is inside. Not impossible, but tough. A base. Inside the miasma,
said Sloan.
Without a constant presence inside the miasma, we're waging war against a perpetually shifting foe.
Delaney hammered her words with sweeping gesticulations.
I conceal a safe haven with my barrier magic, granted the area's small enough not to exhaust me. I already scoped a potential candidate.
She slapped the halves of the map back on the jeep. Leaning close to better view the non-existent details, she planted a finger on a random plot of land near the main street.
Here. It's the Williston Inn, which I cross-referenced online to confirm is still operational. Sealing a motel room is perfectly within my capabilities.
Winnipeg folded her arms.
Fine. As long as there's nothing more to babble about. That covers the main points, said Delaney. Anything else we'll worry about on the way.
At the road, the conga line of vehicles continued its unwitting descent into the depths of human misery, eroded faces in car windows oblivious to all but the beckoning stretch of pathway. Kyubey had mentioned oil in this town. Would so many come so far to so dismal a place for that? Oil, gold, they felt like such pointless concepts nowadays. Winnipeg waved her hand in Sloane's face.
Transform already, Fargo. I am transformed, said Sloan. Your uniform is a filthy old coat. The uniform is under the coat. I'm keeping the coat because it's cold. The lunatics Kyubey gave me this time.
Winnipeg glared at the aforementioned rat bastard perched on Delaney's shoulder.
Is everyone ready?
Said Delaney.
It's constant danger until we reach the inn. Sloan, we need you at full capacity. Don't hold back to conserve magic. We'll pick up enough cubes along the way to cleanse you after. I know what I'm doing, said Sloan. Great, said Delaney. Before we begin, I've prepared a few words of encouragement to lift our spirits.
The katana whipped out with a hiss of metal as Winnipeg charged into the miasma. Sloan materialized her gun and followed, expending the magic necessary to make her weapon functionally weightless. Although her gem had not fully purified, she felt stronger than she had in a long time. She mentally cycled through the bag of tricks she had lacked the luxury of employing during her tenure in Fargo. It was tricky because she had to recalibrate her magic expenditures without going overboard. But she could do it. If nothing else, she had to keep faith in her abilities. Or no amount of magical prowess would help her. Darkness surrounded her on all sides. Only the flitting, transient form of Winnipeg ahead made much coherent sense in the tableau of shadows. She glanced over her shoulder at Delaney as the tall girl overtook her and settled into a position between Sloan and Winnipeg. Her staff glowed bright red, tapering quickly in the void. They pattered along the street for a long time until wraiths appeared. They emerged first as distant faces, brimming on the periphery of Sloane's vision. The moment she turned her head, they shuffled to the side to stay in those nebulous corners of her awareness and prevent her from getting a read on them. A more tangible figure sprung out at her and she almost blasted it to non-existence before she realized it was a man, plaid shirt like all the others, moseying his way down the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets and his gaze between his feet. Around him appeared more and more men in the same clothes and with the same crooked posture, walking to and fro with no apparent goal or destination. In the corners of her vision, the wraiths grew more numerous, more distinct.
"What are they waiting for?" she said.
Or tried to say. The words dissolved into silence as they left her throat. "What are they waiting for?" she said via telepathy. "Keep running," said Delaney. "And when it goes to blows, try not to kill the civilians, okay love?" The wraiths continued to linger at the edge of her sight like spots on her eyes. A trepidation filled her that she had maybe fallen too far out the Fargo kiddie pool. How long since she had seen a proper miasma at all, large enough to swallow a girl in darkness? If she strained, she had the barest memory of a past as competent wraith slayer. Winnipeg struck first. Her tiny form leapt up and blipped to the side in a gust of wind. Between her fell the severed pieces of a lesser wraith. Another wraith emerged from the dark, its grinning pixelated face a crackle of dust and fear, withered claws rising from the folds of its grey cloak and reaching for Sloan. She planted her foot and unleashed a round into the demon. It erupted into particles, dispelling the miasma around it for a brief moment. In that moment, Sloan saw the truth of the world behind the miasma, a sullen town street, storefronts of flaked paint and rickety porches, normal men in search of work and fortune. The real world, the real Williston. The Williston seen by humans. This nightmare realm was only a trick. If she remembered that, she might keep her head. An army of red bubbles sprouted around her, many popping immediately as rippling beam attacks zoomed from all directions. The bubbles burst in deluges of glowing crimson liquid and splattered the street. Sloan tucked her head under the cascade, running and gunning at any wraith fool enough to fall in front of her. "How you holding up, love?" Delaney asked as she caved in a wraith's head with her scepter. "I'm fine. Where's Winnipeg?" "Don't worry about her, just keep up, okay?" In front of Delaney rose an unbreakable line of wraiths, crackling and cackling. Sloan aimed for the center of the ranks to punch a hole or 50. Before she could, a vicious cyclone flashed from the sky and touched down like thunder on the line. The swirling maelstrom tore across the street, slicing through wraiths in a wave of cloaks and pixels. As it reached the curb, the tornado dissipated and Winnipeg landed in its place, lashing out an arm to decapitate a wayward wraith before going airborne and ricocheting off a random floating polygon to pirouette toward the other side of the street, vivisecting wraiths with undetectable katana strikes in the most anime display of skill Sloan had ever seen. A bubble burst by her face and she dipped to avoid the resulting downpour. Delaney seized her by the collar and pulled her forward as a billion more wraiths appeared around them. Weaving through civilians, kinda hard, what with the huge ass gun Sloan was toting, they departed the highway and landed on an arterial road that sidewinded toward some unknown destination. "It's Main Street," said Delaney. "Good job girls, halfway there already." "Halfway already? Piece of cake." Sloan hadn't even taxed her magic too hard. Either her eyes adjusted or some outer ring of darkness had been breached, but before her sprawled a momentous panorama of Williston, or at least the Williston of the miasma, a hellscape of tar beaches and viscous black lagoons, populated with misshapen structures and billowing smokestacks and palpable horror. The impenetrable canopy flashed with intermittent lightning bolts, and everywhere traces of fire flickered between the rows of men and wraiths intermingling in the dark land. Broken castles and yawning towers perforated a horizon of sulfuric gloss. In the center rose a column of unfathomable height, bending and bulging as it poked through a swirl of mist at the top of the miasma. The clock tower. In the twisted geography of this doppelganger world, it metamorphosed into a skyscraper standing sentinel over an infinite wasteland. Winnipeg was right. Delaney's map meant nothing here. Are we going the right way, said Sloan. Delaney quite helpfully failed to answer. They passed an abyssal hole in the ground into which plaid-shirt men hurled themselves while wraiths congregated nearby and gnashed their teeth. Other men lay face down in splatters of oil or black blood. A many-jointed arm dragged a corpse into a crevice. Nothing to save them now, said Delaney, her tone oddly blithe. Well, blithe was her usual tone, but it unnerved Sloan for her to maintain it. Even in Minneapolis, during the heart of the recession when wraith outbreaks worsened every day, Sloan had never seen a miasma like this, a miasma that did not simply distort the world with stagnant air and a dreadful aura but actually created a pocket dimension in the wrinkles of space-time. This world was no trick. It was too vast, too swallowing for a mere trick. No, the world the humans saw was the trick. Illusion had supplanted reality. Bleck, that was all crap. What mattered now was run and gun. She swiveled her turret toward a gaggle of lesser wraiths, blasting luminous holes with carefully managed fire. Charred flecks of grey cloaks drifted on dead air. Behind you, love, said Delaney. Something barreled into Sloane's back and sent her hurtling. She bounced against the ground and smacked into something hard and vertical, rolling back with her hand still clutching the handle of her gun and her nose hemorrhaging blood. Delaney flew to her side but Sloan waved away any gestures of aid and stood on her own, wiping the blood with the back of her hand. Before them loomed a massive creature, a lion body with the head of a man, its pitiless gaze a mess of fragmented distortion where its face should be. With muscled feline limbs the Lamasua stalked toward them, sidewinding through lesser wraiths which quivered and cackled restlessly. Sloan had fought greater wraiths before, but long ago. She hefted her gun and traced the Lamasu's path. Last time she squared against something like this, she had Claire Ibsen at her side. Plan? Said Delaney. Isn't that your job? She stepped back and fired. With a rat-a-tat-tat her gun spewed light from its nozzle. The Lamasa blinked out of way and lunged with monstrous talons and endless reams of fangs. Delaney flung up a bubble but the beast smashed through it like you might expect a 1,000-pound abomination composed of stone and hatred to smash through a bubble. Sloan threw herself aside only to bump into Delaney, unable to make much distance as a claw raked into her side and ripped a pound of flesh out of her. With a painful grunt she hit the ground. The lesser wraiths swooped in like vultures, reaching with elongated talons for the injured prey. Sloan scrambled to her knees, gripping her side as blood gushed between her fingers and raking her gun across the enclosing circle of foes, irradiating them with still potent magic. She made little progress before an oppressive claw gripped her back and forced her down. Rough and bitter soil seeped against her clenched teeth as she twisted her head around to face the lion beast grinning back at her, the crackle of its eyeless sockets sizzling against her cheek. Delaney slammed her staff against the beast's head. With one swipe of a limb it knocked her back, but by the time it returned to Sloan she was ready. She threw her hand into the digital textures of its face and propelled her magic up the nerves of her arm to the tips of her fingers. From her hand erupted a pulse of pure light. The beast's entire head lit up as she incinerated its face and hollowed an immense cavity in its skull. The Lamasua staggered back. Sloan pushed herself up and distanced herself from the wounded creature. Her nose bled and she had a cracked rib or two, although the pain-deadening perks of her soulless body made damage assessment difficult. The Lamasua wasn't doing so bad for missing most of its head, managing to remain on four legs as it swayed back and forth. She raised her gun for the coup de grace, except the moment the barrel started to spin the Lamasua regained its acuities and bounded out of the way, bouncing off a wall and sailing at her. She rolled to the side and flung herself upright. The greater wraith pawed at where she had been. Around the wraith manifested a grid of bubbles. Delaney appeared beside Sloan, miraculously unharmed. Not even a scuff on her gown. Shoot the bubbles, love. Sloan failed to understand at first but soon the idea registered. She aimed at a bubble and fired. As before, at the sound of her gun, the Lamasua tried to leap away. But her piercing light hit the bubble and ricocheted into other bubbles, and that light ricocheted, until soon the entire bubble grid lit up with constantly rebounding pillars of light. Despite the contortions of the Lamasu's lithe body, shafts impaled it from all directions at once. The mouthless wraith unleashed a piteous inhuman wail and disintegrated into a shower of grief cubes. Goddamn bubbles! Sloan gasped for breath. Fuck, I need healing. From the cracks and small spaces more wraiths emerged. They clustered into tightly packed squads and lumbered forward. Time for that later. Let's keep moving. Delaney sprinted down the road and Sloan followed, her pain numb but detectable, like the broken edge of a broomstick jabbing against her stomach every time she took a step. Of course no time for healing, although Delaney looked pretty prim and proper herself. Sloan wasted little time griping because she soon noticed another problem. The fuck happened to Winnipeg? Don't worry. I'm sure she's fine, said Delaney. That's not the issue. It's okay, love, we're almost there. Almost where? Sloan stared down the rollicking pandemonium stretched before them. The slanted constructions had doors and windows but were otherwise indistinct globules of architecture, some melting into frothing vats of oil, others crumbling to dust beneath the weight of the wraiths piled atop them. Dead air rushed in and out of Sloane's chest as blood gushed down her side. Each vanquished wraith was replaced immediately by more. She was nearing the twilight zone of her soul gem, that running on empty strand that heralded death by cycles. Having to worry less about dodging or blocking had helped somewhat, but the sheer volume of ammunition she launched into the undying hordes was tolling her strength to its limits. This way, said Delaney. She pointed at a deformed two-story construction, the left side of which was detaching from the whole. Over the door hung a sign, Williston Inn. Pale light filtered from within. Between them and the inn stood another lamassu, staring them down with a horrible grin, its forelegs poised to propel it forward. Sloan and Delaney skidded to a halt by a car propped on cinder blocks. Sloan leaned against the vehicle and fought to catch her breath. Another bubble attack? She asked, aware how ridiculous she sounded. This one's full strength, said Delaney. Can you fry its face as well, love? When it gets close enough to maul me, yeah. Forget that her lungs would give out at any moment and her skull ached and she was too afraid to even check her gem. The lamassu crouched into a position to pounce. Sloan scanned for somewhere to duck, but everywhere was clogged with more wraiths, a carnival of staticky grey balloon heads bobbing up and down and click-clacking stone teeth. Something flashed and neatly bisected the lamassu. As the two halves plopped to the earth and vanished into small mounds of cubes, Winnipeg stuck the landing and whipped her katana around to posture at a nearby wraith platoon. You two are slow. If not exhausted as fuck, Sloan might have given a nice retort. But the only thing she wanted now was safety, so she hobbled after Delaney and Winnipeg into the hotel lobby. The walls bulged and deflated like her own throbbing ribcage. Tons of plaid-shirted men milled about with bowed heads, some forming an uneasy line by the receptionist desk, others seated in waiting room chairs that had a tendency to float or liquefy. A sign on the desk read "No vacancy." Delaney butted through the crowd and leaned over the counter to tweak the nose of a hollow-eyed receptionist. Sloan kept close and searched the room for wraiths, but Winnipeg must have cleared it.
Hello ma'am, said Delaney. We're looking for a room, one bed'll be fine. The hell you doing, said Sloan.
Her voice descended multiple octaves in the miasma.
Sorry love, I can only afford to seal a small area. We'll have to get friendly with another. I mean, why are you bothering with her about it?
The elderly receptionist indicated the sign.
No vacancy. No vacancy. No vacancy. Surely you must have something? We're three poor girls out on our lonesome, it's so dangerous nowadays.
Delaney stood on tiptoe to lean closer, faces nearly touching. She winked with a cute smile.
No vacancy. No vacancy. No vacancy.
Sloan glanced over her shoulder. Wraith faces swelled in the doorway, clambering to enter. Deal with them, will you, love?
What if the president himself needed a room at your fine establishment? Surely you would have a room for him. Well, the president isn't coming. So. No vacancy. No vacancy. No vacancy.
Sloan lifted her gun, but lethargic humans crammed the lobby and blocked her line of fire. She tried to herd them aside, to no avail.
I'll pay twice the going rate,
said Delaney. She pulled out a checkbook and clicked a pen. The receptionist droned her repetitive dirge of no vacancy. Winnipeg, as usual, had gone somewhere. Sloan finally pushed enough men away and blasted the wraiths crowding through the doorway. Every round shredded the foremost ranks and several more behind them. Despite the pain in her chest and her side and her head and the exhaustion seeping between her eyes, she managed a smile at the unbounded annihilation raining forth onto these so-called embodiments of human misery. What could such creatures do to her? Claire Ibsen and Minneapolis inched closer. Until a shard of pain impaled her brain like an aneurysm. She staggered back into the counter, her gunfire drooping into the floor before subsiding completely. She pressed a hand to her soul gem. It was trembling, she could feel even though the coat. Delaney was on the other side of the counter, flipping through a ledger. The receptionist slumped face down on the desk. Blood streamed through her curled grey hair.
What did you do?
Sloan wheezed. Wraiths approached the doors, no longer deterred by her fire. Delaney opened a drawer and retrieved a rusted brass key.
No worries, love. Merely unconscious. She was getting on my nerves, you know. Muttering the same thing every time.
Her voice was crystalline clear. Sloan had no time to protest. As Delaney hopped over the counter and made for the stairs in no particular hurry, Sloan ambled after. Winnipeg, you there? Said Delaney. Upstairs. I cleared the inn. Lovely. Keep up the good work. The stairs corkscrewed in Escher directions. Sloane's vision faded in and out. She groped along the banister, following the flitting tail of Delaney's gown. Her gun grew heavier and heavier until it dematerialized when she ceased her magic. She had to hope Delaney's bubbles watched her back. When the stairs ended, she almost fell forward. She stuck out her hands and steadied herself between the walls of the corridor. Numbered doors lined the hall on either side. Delaney stopped at each door and tried her key. No matter how many times she stopped, Sloan fell further behind. In the distance stood a tiny figure barely recognizable as Winnipeg. The walls of the corridor closed in, bending and bulging and bursting with little pops of vaporizing paint. Something struck her from behind, passing clean through her back and out her previously uninjured side. It looked like a wraith wound. They must be shooting. I'm hit. Sorry, love, I lose a little focus when I'm frustrated. She wedged the key into another keyhole. I'll try harder. The space between the walls diminished to a narrow aperture. Sloan sidled through the gap as Delaney finally opened a door and disappeared inside immediately, Winnipeg behind her. Help, said Sloan. She sounded so fucking pathetic. Like those strung-out girls who wandered into Fargo sometimes to beg for handouts, the kind that disappeared without a trace in a corner somewhere. Worth more than 15%, said Winnipeg. Ha. The walls squeezed against her. After months of living on cereal, she lacked much of a third dimension, but her coat bulked her up. The force became crushing and she could not tell if she were moving forward. Paint dribbled down the walls and pooled in her hair and coated the side of her face. She stretched a hand as far as possible. Come on, Delaney. Grab it. Don't leave me here. Her head was awash in fire and agony, her thoughts muddled together. Hallucinations danced across her irises. She saw Claire Ibsen at a piano recital in a nice blue dress. Her pale white fingers glided over the keys while her head fell from her body. The head rolled to Sloane's feet. Sloan placed her boot on the skull and pushed. Something grabbed her hand and dragged her forward. With a final exertion, her worthless body staggered through the door, collapsing into the room at Winnipeg's feet. Winnipeg snorted and turned away as Delaney slammed the door and locked it.
You made it,
said Delaney.
I'm so happy. Now be a dear and watch the window, make sure nothing comes in while I'm sealing the room.
Sloan writhed on the ground, curling into herself, digging a hand into the shag carpeting.
Cubes.
She maybe said, or maybe not.
Hold a moment longer, love. I'll be with you once we're safe and sound inside our new home.
With graceful aplomb, Delaney lifted her staff and touched the tip to the door. Red liquid gushed out and drizzled down to the carpet as Delaney slowly dragged her staff along the wall. Only now did Sloan realize it was blood, the bubbles and the liquid, and all of it was blood. Like the blood on her hands and face and coat. Delaney entered the bathroom and traced over the mirror and along the shower. She returned to the main room and climbed over the bed, allowing the blood to flow down the pillows and onto the blankets. She opened the closet and pushed aside a plaid-shirted man who hung from a noose as she maneuvered along the walls. She crossed the one black window and returned along the original wall, connecting her line at the door. She stepped aside, admired her handiwork, and returned to her plain clothes. The staff disappeared, as did the blood. Only a faint mark remained on the walls. The miasma in the room dispersed and oxygen flowed again. The dead man in the closet swayed with the breeze. His rope creaked. Delaney clapped her hands.
There. All sealed. No wraith can enter as long as the seal remains. Which it will do unless I can supply the magic to sustain it. But that won't be a problem for a room this small. You expect us to stay here together?
Said Winnipeg. She had not reverted her magical girl ensemble, although she sheathed her katana.
Think of it as a character-building experience,
said Delaney. She kneeled beside Sloan and stroked her hair.
How do you feel? Here, let me help.
She offered a generous handful of cubes. Sloan didn't know when Delaney had grabbed them and didn't care. She pressed the cubes to her gem as Delaney turned her over and inspected her wounds.
You're very brave, Sloan.
Her face was so close that Sloan could see the utter emptiness in Delaney's eyes. They were bright and soft, but behind the irises lurked nothing at all, imitations of real eyes. Delaney slid an arm under Sloane's back and another under her knees. She carefully placed Sloan on the bed, resting her head on the pillow that moments before had been drenched in blood. She began to heal. Chapter 4, Reason, Rectitude, Justice. The one window in the hotel room may have been an obsidian slab. Its lacquered surface only reflected, nothing shone through. Winnipeg stood before it with arms crossed. In the reflection she watched Regina Saskatoon, or Delaney, play caretaker to Fargo, waving her staff to summon frolicking bubbles of blood. She hummed a quaint tune. Fargo had passed out. In the closet hung a dead man. Regina Saskatoon appeared to have no intention of removing it. Winnipeg had told Kyubey no assistance was necessary. She could clear Williston alone, like she had cleared Manitoba alone, like she had cleared her namesake city alone. Their first skirmish only affirmed her suspicions. Infestation or no, irregular spawn patterns or no, Archon or no, Winnipeg would do better without these dimwits. Kyubey was no idiot. In fact, he was the opposite. Why rope in Fargo? She was good as dead. Either the wraiths killed her or the cycles. A mere matter of time. Yet the rat expressly commanded to keep Fargo alive. A command Winnipeg had no intention to follow, although it seemed Regina Saskatoon had taken it to heart. Which brought up the other issue.
Regina Saskatoon. Why are you here?
Regina Saskatoon busied about Fargo with maternal conceit.
Please, Winnipeg. Call me Regina. Or better yet, Delaney. It's so confusing if Sloan calls me one thing and you another, you know. Why are you here?
She smiled.
I'm here to save the town. Aren't we all? I'm here for territory. Fargo for cubes. You have your own town in Saskatchewan to save. 2 towns, in fact. Why are you here?
The bubbles clustered around Fargo's body and burst, drenching her in blood. Fargo did not awake as the blood seeped through her open gashes.
I told you, Winnipeg. I'm here to save the town. Your selfish interests don't make mine selfish too.
She brushed back her hair and extended her hands over Fargo's body.
Drop the facade, said Winnipeg. I research my neighbors. I know what you really are. Really?
Tremors crept through Regina Saskatoon's outstretched palms. The blood that had sunk into Fargo's body slowly flowed back out of it, rivulets pooling into a dense sphere under Regina Saskatoon's fingertips.
Tell me, Winnipeg, because I'm pretty curious myself sometimes. What am I really? A killer.
The blood ceased its ebb. Regina Saskatoon guided the pooled sphere into her mouth, swallowing it in one gulp. She wiped her lips.
Drudge up ancient history, will you? That happened before you even contracted. As if you haven't offed a few girls yourself. Not a single one. Of course not.
Regina Saskatoon pulled the blankets and tucked Fargo in. She bent over and bestowed a kiss on the forehead.
You merely arrive at their town and kick them out into the tundra, and if they freeze to death or disappear in a hovel, that's no business of yours, is it? I heard you enjoyed it when you killed her. It was the most emotion you ever produced.
Regina Saskatoon gripped the edge of the bed and leaned forward.
Who told you that? Kyubey? You don't trust him. I know what questions to ask. When it comes to statistics, he is remarkably accurate. Where is he, anyway? I thought you had him on your shoulder like a parrot.
A red glint crept into Regina Saskatoon's otherwise blank eyes. Her hands wrung together and twisted her white gloves.
Maybe, dear, it's best not to get on the bad side of a supposed murderer.
In an instant Winnipeg sprung from the window and landed atop the bed, her sword tip against Regina Saskatoon's pale throat. Despite the doughy and unstable mattress, the tip did not quiver.
Don't threaten me, Regina Saskatoon. Threaten something more vital than my head, will you?
The deadpan delivery gave way to a crawling smirk upon Regina Saskatoon's face, which burst into a quake of brittle laughter.
You should take me seriously, said Winnipeg. I do not kill Puella Magi, but you are one only in name. Tell me why you are here.
Fine. Regina Saskatoon rolled her eyes.
I'm here because I love misery and suffering and all things evil. The thought of men devoured in the most monstrous ways titillates me sexually. The corpse in our closet already has me pretty randy. I'm simply the most depraved creature known to humankind, there's no other explanation.
Winnipeg seized her hair and slammed her against the wall.
If that is true, tell me why I shouldn't do our species a favor and terminate you right now.
Regina Saskatoon twisted her face to speak.
Do you understand sarcasm? Do you understand I want a serious answer? Not so loud, please. You'll wake Sloan. Answer me. I told you. I'm here to do my duty as a magical girl and defend humanity from personified despair. But you're too convinced I'm an inhuman monster to believe me.
A backhand to the face silenced her. Regina Saskatoon was an insidious sorceress. Her staked claim covered a minor area, but one unmolested by the renegades, wanderers, and vagabonds who whispered its name with trepidation and awe. They said an ill omen festered there, an imperceptible miasma lingering like the scent of death. A curse born of murder, a curse that tainted the creeks and fallowed the earth. This woman, this Regina Saskatoon, this Delaney Pollock dwelled in the center of the vortex. Winnipeg refused to believe superstition, but one did not inspire such fear without cause.
Whatever your plan, Winnipeg said, try it. Manipulate Fargo, turn her against me, team up. It will not work.
Regina Saskatoon cackled again.
Turn against you? Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear.
Winnipeg released her with disgust. It concerned her little what the Cretan plotted. There had been assassination attempts before, women convinced they could overpower with deceit. She had left each one beaten and bruised and nursing crushed hopes. Kyubey sent them, she was sure of it. He swore he was forbidden to turn Puella Magi against each other, by whom? He only mentioned a vague employer, but Winnipeg knew he believed her inefficient and wasteful. And thus, in his mind, worthy of termination. No matter. If the rat turned Regina Saskatoon against her, Winnipeg would neutralize her and absorb her territory, curse be damned. It's bad to fight, said a familiar voice inside her head. The incubator himself sat perched on the windowsill and stared at them. Straightening her clothes, Regina Saskatoon circumnavigated Winnipeg and let in the rat, carefully sealing the window behind him. She picked him up like a kitten and carried him to the bed, where Fargo's spent grief cubes awaited. It's wasteful for magical girls to expend energy fighting amongst themselves instead of against wraiths.
Where have you been?
Said Winnipeg. Regina Saskatoon fed the rat cubes, undeterred by the freakish receptacle on his back. I was separated during the combat. But since wraiths take no interest in me, it was a simple matter of finding my way here.
Go on, Kyubey.
Regina Saskatoon tweaked one of his floppy ears.
Tell mean old Winnipeg why I decided to come.
Miss Delaney agreed to my terms in order to contribute to the salvation of the universe, and by extension, her species. Despite the statement's fallibility, Regina Saskatoon gave a fatuous look as though everything was explained. Winnipeg snorted. The most roundabout and ambiguous phrasing possible, classic rat's peak. Now that Kyubey was around, Winnipeg didn't feel like pressing further. He would only confound her with his specious logic. Besides, she already knew all she needed, Regina Saskatoon was no friend. Not that Winnipeg kept friends. Regina Saskatoon let the matter die as well. She stroked Kyubey's belly and waggled his paws. Repulsed by this spectacle, Winnipeg returned to the window and stared at her obscure reflection. Sloan awoke sore and slow, the room's confines ebbing into focus as she pieced together the events preceding her catnap. It took not long to remember she had embarrassed herself pretty solid. Someone had removed her coat and her boots and tucked her under the covers like baby's first bedtime. She threw off the blanket and swung her legs over the side of the bed, viciously rubbing her eyes and jamming on her boots. She shimmied into her coat, nice and clean and cured of bloodstains. Delaney was washing her face in the sink, robed in a pink bath towel. The mirror had clouded and a perfumed aroma wafted through the quarters. Winnipeg stared into the window, still in uniform.
How long was I out? Oh, not long, love.
Delaney ran a brush through her damp hair, peering intently into her opaque reflection.
I'm simply ecstatic you made it okay. No hurts.
Sloan prodded her side.
You're a skilled healer.
The only remnants of her wound were the ragged gashes in her coat. Nothing she hadn't handled before. After years of abuse, she had become proficient at mending with magic, despite having no innate aptitude. She had to conceptualize rays of light twisting into individual threads and entwining to patch the holes. Odd, but effective. You could get a lot done with any power if you were creative enough. Sloan had the creativity of something not very creative. The whole threading holes with light trick had been suggested by Claire Ibsen a long time ago. Claire had a totally different type of magic, but that hadn't stopped her from upstaging Sloan at her own craft. She decided not to wander down Minneapolis Lane, it tended to muddle her soul gem. Best to keep Claire Ibsen and the whole tragic backstory bullshit cached at an untouchable distance, like a carrot on a stick. Doing so had the best effect on her psyche. From the bathroom Delaney emerged in a puff of white powder, fully clothed in hair in a buoyant dew. She cradled Kyubey in her arms. Had she taken the bastard into the shower? Yuck.
Get some rest, Sloan dear. We've a big day tomorrow, you'll need as much strength as you can muster. There is no need for rest, said Winnipeg. Fatigue, hunger, thirst. These are merely restrictions we instill upon ourselves in a desperate gambit to pretend we are still human. If you succumb to such yearnings, you can hardly be considered a Puella Magi. That's not true at all, said Delaney. Sure, we can't starve to death, but these bodies deteriorate without proper nourishment.
She plopped on the bed and relinquished Kyubey to inspect her nails, bright red and perfectly manicured.
All nourishment can be replaced by cubes, said Winnipeg. We embark in search of the Archon in 10 minutes. If you need to replenish your body, you have the means.
She indicated a pile of cubes collected from the previous battle, stacked upon a bureau at the foot of the bed. Sloan took out her soul gem for examination. As suspected, it had only reached a partial purity. She picked one of the cubes and held it to the gem. Only the faintest trickle of despair osmosed out and soon dwindled to nothing. Maybe if she used the whole pile, she would manage something. But she suspected Winnipeg and her 15% stipulation might object, let alone Kyubey and his frequent sermons on wastefulness and efficiency. She knew gems lost their luster eventually. There was a reason beyond the danger why so few magical girls grew to magical women. After a few years, the despair creeps in and refuses to leave. At first, it's small. A nagging thought or two, maybe the gem only looks a little dull because your eyes are what's failing. But soon the reality becomes undeniable. No tragedy, no calamity is needed to spark it. A few years fighting the evils of mankind with no friends and no hope, and even the most idealistic falter. And once the faltering begins, well, despair begets despair. The doom extinguishes even the smallest hopes, replacing them with that all-devouring why bother? Her own mentor had succumbed to it, back when she and Claire Ibsen were novices. The girl was 22, a Methuselah of the trade, and after 10 years of contentedly combating evil she sat down and asked if what she did meant anything, and poof. Law of the cycles. Sloan closed her hand around her gem and tucked it into her coat. She would not suffer the same fate. Kyubey had told her there were enough cubes at Williston to stem the tide, and she chose to believe him. She had no choice but to believe. Even if it meant believing him, she would believe. The important thing was to remember Claire Ibsen, the carrot on the stick. Sloan Redfearn couldn't possibly die without taking Claire along to magical girl hell, could she? Of course not.
Oh, hooey,
said Delaney, reminding Sloan a conversation was happening around her.
Cubes aren't everything. You can feel hunger no matter what the cubes do. It's no fun fighting on an empty stomach.
Winnipeg shrugged.
Reliance on carnal needs is mere self-limitation. Take our current plight. How do you propose we find sustenance in the middle of the miasma? Unless you intend to compose a meal of ash. No, I'll order a pizza.
Delaney plucked her cell from her pocket and tapped the display. Winnipeg was so baffled she could not even muster a rebuttal. Sloan did it for her.
A pizza? Here. Of course. I researched this town before we came, after all. Seems even the remotest American locale has a pizza parlor.
She dialed the number.
Hello. My name's Delaney, I'd love to order a large pizza. Hello? Yes, I said large pizza. Is that a problem? Oh, fantastic. Can we have it with pepperoni and olives?
She muffled the receiver and addressed her companions.
You're not vegetarians, right?
Sloan shook her head. Winnipeg reported she would not be eating.
Yes, pepperoni and olives is fine. How can you be out of olives? You have to have olives, that's simply irrational. Oh, fine. What about pineapple? No pineapple,
said Sloan. Although as starved as she was, she would eat whatever was in front of her.
They don't have pineapple anyway,
said Delaney.
What do you have? I already know you have pizza, ma'am. Yes, I want a large pizza, I said that. Stop repeating the same thing, please, you're getting on my nerves.
She stuck a finger into her mouth and gagged at Sloan.
Okay, yeesh. Pepperoni pizza it is. Oh, and throw in a thing of soda, will you? Thanks a million.
Delaney gave the address and room number, although she had to say it 5 times until whoever was on the other end understood. She hung up with a profusion of saccharine gratitude.
Now we just hope the wraiths don't eat the delivery boy. The embarkation time to find the Archon remains unchanged, said Winnipeg. You have 3 minutes now. But we ordered pizza,
said Delaney.
How could we leave now? Besides, you have no idea where to even start looking. I've triangulated the 3 most suitable locations of the Archon Den, but if you want to hear them you'll have to wait. I will scour the entire town and find the Archon on my own.
Sloan groaned. A pizza would be her first hot meal in eons, but if Winnipeg went and killed the Archon alone, all spoils would go to her. Not to mention Sloan had a reputation to rebuild. Delaney may not mind playing a frilly debutante, but for Sloan to stay behind when she should be fighting would be an admission of weakness. Not that she cared what Winnipeg and Delaney thought, but Sloan couldn't admit to herself that she would do nothing when presented with an opportunity to return to power.
I'm going, she said. No,
said Winnipeg.
Especially not you. Keep the agreed upon 15% after I slay the Archon, but stay in this room and do not encumber me with your presence. I have no intention to slow down and kiss your every scratch, which means you will merely die if you follow me. I see no point in allowing a needless death to occur. I slew more wraiths than either of you in that fight,
said Sloan.
Debatable.
Winnipeg stopped in front of the door.
You also consumed the brunt of our curative magic and barely limped out alive. Your offensive capabilities are adequate, and would perhaps be useful if you had a modicum of defensive skill. I have no use for a glass cannon. Then I go out and die.
Sloan held up her filthy soul gem.
You see this? This is after I purified it. I would have given in long ago, but I have unfinished business in Minneapolis. If I can't kill wraiths, I got no hope finishing that business anyway. No hope, no life. I'll take my chances in the miasma.
Winnipeg closed her eyes.
Very well. I shall give you no assistance nor shall I expect you to want any. At the very least, you are no coward.
With a huff, Delaney sprung up and barred the door with her palm. The same smile remained plastered on her face, but the slight furrow of her brow betrayed her annoyance.
A short break would be wonderful, not simply to chart our next path, but to discuss Fargo's fighting style. You admit yourself she had strengths. If we could iron out her weaknesses, which we've already identified, then maybe instead of a worthless burden she could be, I dunno, helpful. A conversation over pizza will not rectify years of poor technique, said Winnipeg. I shall kill the Archon myself.
Delaney's fingertips drummed against the door. Her other arm remained taut at her side.
Kyubey told you I've dealt with an Archon before, yes? Did he tell you how many other girls I needed to do it? 12,
said Winnipeg.
You and 12 others. Only you walked out the miasma alive. Quite convenient you were the sole survivor, after you called in the others for help.
Kyubey only told girls things he wanted them to know. If his intention was for them to work together, why feed Winnipeg information to make her suspicious? He hadn't even mentioned to Sloan she would work with others. He claimed it was because she would never have come, and maybe that was true. But Sloan wasn't so sure. After all, he had managed to cajole Winnipeg into the plot after telling her, and it was Winnipeg who was currently most opposed to the whole team shebang. The rat bastard stared at her with placid eyes. Now that they were cooped in the room together or else out fighting, Sloan doubted she would get the chance to grill him on her dubious companions.
It wasn't chance I alone survived, said Delaney. I have the best barrier and healing magic north of Chicago. It's only natural my survivability would outpace your normal magical girl. So you sacrificed your teammates to save yourself, said Sloan. Let's not be melodramatic, love. Have you ever taken first aid training? The healer always cares for herself before anyone else. If the healer dies, everybody dies.
Sloan did not have a ready remark. The door knocked. Delaney opened it, glancing to either side of the pizza delivery boy in case wraiths were nearby. The delivery boy's eyes had the same glazed look as the town's other denizens, ensnared by a hypnotic trance. Delaney donned her most ebullient smile and paid the boy, who was more of a grizzled bearded man, with cash from a heart-shaped wallet, bidding him to keep the change before relieving him of pizza box and half-gallon of soda. She slammed the door and placed the food on the bed. It smelled fucking delicious. Sloan tried not to look too eager. Especially since Winnipeg had not moved from the door.
Enjoy it, Winnipeg said. I am leaving. Do you still plan to follow, Fargo?
Sloan's stomach rumbled. She clenched her fists. I highly recommend all three of you stay. Kyubey squirmed his way to the pizza box like they would give the fucker even a bite. I have access to each of your magical capabilities in terms of raw statistics and can calculate with ease your percentages of success. Miss Dufresne.
My name is Winnipeg.
You are not the first magical girl to take that name, nor will you be the last. It is much easier to track you if I use your birth name. In any case, your chance of defeating the Archon by yourself is rather low. Otherwise, I wouldn't have suggested teaming up. The risks of infighting and inefficiency usually outstrip the rewards, but if the Archon is not defeated at all, that's merely wasteful.
And my chances are improved with these two? One is a clinical sociopath and the other is less than worthless.
Rude, said Delaney. The crease in her brow deepened. Delaney Pollock is reliable. Sloan Redfearn is a magical girl of above average potential.
What a cute answer, said Winnipeg. Very well, I'll wait for their pizza party.
They had no plates, but a few napkins came with the pizza. They took turns drinking straight from the soda bottle. Germs registered a big fat zilch on Sloan's list of concerns. Winnipeg, statuesque, didn't even look at the pizza. Delaney dabbed her lips with a napkin.
Sloan love. I heard you mention Minneapolis earlier, were you born there?
Damn, her whole getting to know you bit again. With a mouthful of pizza Sloan couldn't feign sleep, although she took sweet time chewing before replying.
No. Beautiful city. Twin Cities, that is. Minneapolis is the Twin Cities, right? Yeah. Minneapolis and St. Paul.
If Delaney and Winnipeg had asked Kyubey about each other, they had asked about Sloan, too. And if they knew anything about Sloan, they knew all they needed.
Lovely.
She started her second slice while Sloan went for fourths.
What did you wish for?
Sloan blinked at the apparent non sequitur. Her wish? That was eternities ago.
My sister was blind. I cured her. Pretty typical.
She swigged the soda.
That's so sweet of you. I had an inkling you were a good person under all that gruff. No.
Sloan puzzled how to approach this, as if she were discussing the Dead Sea Scrolls. Her family felt more like ideological concepts than real beings.
Jealousy. She always got the attention. Mom and Dad fawned over her and let me do whatever. Any minor accomplishment of hers was praised, mine ignored. At school everyone was nice to her. I figured if she wasn't blind they wouldn't care so much. I still think it was a nice wish, Sloan, said Delaney. You could have wished for people to like you instead of her, that would be more direct. But you didn't, you wished for her to get well. Yeah, said Sloan. When they still didn't like me, I regretted not doing it like you said.
This was all ancient history, documented for posterity. If Delaney wanted to worm her way into Sloan's heart, she needed to try harder.
Do you still regret it? Whichever way I wished it, said Sloan. It means nothing now. Another pointless wish.
Winnipeg spoke for the first time since returning to the window.
There are worse wishes. Oh.
Delaney nibbled a crust.
That sounds like the opening of another story. Do tell, I love to hear the wishes of others.
With the same paleontological distance, Winnipeg spoke.
I wished a boy loved me. I was 12. I was sick of him in a month.
And nothing more. Sloan tried to reconcile the current Winnipeg with the one who had made that wish however long ago. A giggly schoolgirl, writing love poems. Wondering if he noticed her, thinking about him holding her. It was an impossible image.
Well,
began Delaney with theatrical aplomb,
I wished for a puppy. A puppy?
Delaney nodded.
Yup. I wanted him so bad. But I couldn't have him. So I wished for him, and now he's a big grown doggy. My mom and dad watch him. You sold your soul for a dog,
said Winnipeg. She turned from the window. Her eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms.
He was so cute, you should have seen him.
Delaney hung her hands like little paws, scrunched up her face, and waggled her snout. She actually yipped. After Sloan and Winnipeg's unamused glares, she desisted the charade and scooped another slice of pizza. The puppy thing might make sense if Delaney had been, like, 6 when she contracted. But she acted like she would have wished it again if given the chance. If Sloan wasted her life on what was in the running for shittiest wish of all time, she would have purged all thought of canines from her mind long ago. Apparently, Winnipeg couldn't take the second-hand embarrassment either. Her mood, which had teetered between putting up with this shit and God fucking damn it, plummeted.
The only reason I agreed to letting you fill your faces was to learn the quickest route to the Archon.
With a muffled murmur, Delaney clenched her pizza between her teeth, wiped her fingers, and unfolded the map. She laid both halves on the bed and took care to line up the torn edges before taking the pizza from her mouth.
Of course. We've been lucky so far. The Archon has only expanded the town. He hasn't bent the angles or done any chronological shenanigans, which happened on my last Archon adventure. As I mentioned before, now that we've established a firm presence inside his HQ, he'll have a hard time making more macro alterations to space-time. Small changes are still in his prerogative, but it's like trying to twist a wheel when someone's rammed a stake between the spokes. Us being the stake, of course. Meaning?
Said Winnipeg.
It means, my dear, that my lovely map continues to reflect an almost perfect depiction of the geographic reality of Williston, despite your protestations to the contrary. The only difference is scale. While before, the entire town was about a mile from one end to the other, it's now probably...
She tapped her chin and turned her eyes toward the ceiling.
10 times that. Which is another reason why establishing a base inside the miasma is so important. Cuts travel time to ribbons.
Sloan more or less followed her. Miasmas were essentially pockets where real-world rules could be altered depending on the wraiths within. Delaney had simply determined the specific alterations and updated her spatial understanding of the town to accommodate. But Winnipeg leaned over the map with warm care and perched her chin on her fist. Spatial analytics pseudoscience probably went a big whoosh over her head. The ease at which Delaney transitioned from puppies to wrinkles in space-time was kind of unnerving.
I didn't solely pick this in as our base for its creature comforts, Delaney continued. Any closet would have sufficed. No, the inn provides a central location between my 3 chief candidates for the Archon's lair.
From the inexhaustible depths of her jacket pocket, Delaney retrieved a pair of glasses and pushed them up the bridge of her nose as she leaned into the map.
Bad eyesight?
Sloan asked.
Only for reading, love,
said Delaney.
I can fix that.
She looked up. Her glasses flashed under the light.
Oh. Yeah. I wished to cure blindness, remember? Fixing eyesight is about the only healing magic I have.
Delaney returned to the map.
No thanks, love. I like myself the way I am. Anywho. Neither of you have seen an Archon, but from what I've gathered in my extensive research, they have unique appearances. From what you've gathered?
Said Winnipeg.
You don't know. Oh, I basically know. I've only personally laid eyes on one Archon, which was Saskatoon 2010. However, eyewitness records of Fort McMurray 1985 describe it totally different from what I saw. The only constant between the 2 Archons is they were both massive. Like, blot out this guy big. I confirmed with Kyubey, largeness is a recurring trait. Which means its hiding place has to be similarly large. But...
Winnipeg scratched at her ear.
You said distance is stretched here. So how is this relevant? Stretched, yes,
said Delaney.
But some place larger to begin with will obviously stretch more than some place smaller. Which means the largest structures in the city will be multiplicatively larger than before. Hence, my candidate locations for the Archon's lair.
Another dramatic pause as she raised her hand above her head and slammed an outstretched finger onto the map.
The City Hall.
She raised her finger and brought it down again.
The school.
She raised her finger and brought it down again.
And the airstrip. Not technically a structure, I know. But these are far and away the most likely places. So instead of combing 100-square-mile wilderness, we need only examine these choice locales. Aren't you glad you waited, Winnipeg? Assuming your predictions are accurate. Of course they are,
said Delaney. Sloan finished the last slice of pizza. She had eaten 5 all told, and it had taken iron restraint not to wolf them down. She downed the dregs of the soda and wiped her mouth. In Fargo, her quality of life verged on third world. Calorically independent body notwithstanding, pizza did leagues more to satisfy than a paltry diet of cubes.
I see no further reason to linger, said Winnipeg. The City Hall is the closest of the suggested locations. We scour it first.
Delaney sagaciously permitted Winnipeg to have the final word, and Sloan had no objections herself. The pizza was finished and she had little intention of letting Delaney probe more personal information. Without ceremony, they sallied forth. Chapter 5, In Hell Thy Kingdom. A globe revolves. The prairies of the American Midwest roll across a frostbitten landscape and crash against the foothills of mountains that split the continent asunder with the gnashing teeth of snow-capped peaks. The land rises, then descends into a parched desert basin, the ground cracked for lack of water. A coastline emerges, dotted with cities of men, and quickly passes into an expanse of unbroken lapis lazuli. This ocean passes, land is sighted on the horizon. It is another continent, the largest in the world. At the vanguard of this continent stand 4 islands, jagged and inhospitable. Few things grow on them. Tremors ravage them, seas unleash momentous tides upon them, volcanoes burst chunks of craggy magma. And yet these lands have prospered into a nation of cities and skyscrapers, of effervescence and economy. A nation that has survived all calamities of humanity, war, famine, conquest. The most devastating weapons mankind has yet unleashed fell here. In this nation Japan deities slumber. The globe stops. The perspective of heaven or satellites dwindles, closing in on Japan and the interconnected megalopolis that spans it. Ocean and mountains are eschewed in favor of bridges and structures. Streets, lights, people appear. Honeycombs of productivity, lifelines of transit, shopping districts, factories, companies, schools. From these schools, identical children in identical uniforms return to their homes, clustered in groups of 2 or more. They chat animatedly, discuss their futures, laugh, and play. 2 of these pupils are Madoka Kaname and her very best friend, Homura Akemi. Madoka did most of the talking. It pleased Homura to listen no matter the topic. The topic was their studies.
I'm not looking forward to the English test.
Madoka held her bag in front of her. It kept bouncing as she walked.
I get marked down for the tiniest things. People think I'm really good at English because I lived in the United States for 3 years, but sometimes it just makes it more difficult. My grammar's really bad.
Said Homura. They turned onto a paved pathway lined by hedgerows. Homes of ferociously modern architecture fanned out in both directions. Many of the school children lived in one of these houses or another, so fellow students surrounded them, each lost in their own conversations and cares.
Maybe I could ask Mammy for help, Madoka continued. She's always using English when she fights, and plus she's in a more advanced class, so she's probably good at it, right? I'm just worried it would be too much of a hassle. School's hard enough for all of us, considering we're out fighting every night. On second thought, I better not bother her.
She wouldn't say no, said Homura.
I know. That's the worst part. Even though it would make things harder for her, she would still do it. I'll just cram for an hour before we go wraith hunting tonight. My grade won't be so good, but I guess I don't have a choice, do I? Being a magical girl comes before all of this.
They weaved through the hedge-lined walkways, delving deeper into the grid pattern of suburban homesteads. The further they walked, the fewer students remained around them.
That's no reason to give up on your life, Madoka, said Homura. Do what makes you happy.
Madoka rubbed the back of her head and gave a sheepish grin.
Well, I wouldn't exactly consider studying something that makes me happy. Truth be told, I'm not sure what does make me happy. Probably being with you and the others.
Homura said nothing. They were nearing Madoka's house. Homura knew the way by heart. Save for them, the road had emptied. Well, them and the gaggle of gothic black dolls that marched behind them, each with identical white faces, wide elliptical eyes, and serrated grins. But other than Homura, nobody ever noticed the dolls much. They reached Madoka's house, a geometric construction surrounded by gardens and lawn. Madoka's aproned father pruned vegetation. When he saw them, he waved and said hello. Homura held up a hand to wave back. Madoka gave Homura a slight bow.
Thanks for walking me home, Homura. You really don't need to go through all the trouble, I know you live in the complete opposite direction.
The dolls pranced along the tops of hedges, unacknowledged by Madoka.
I enjoy our walks, said Homura. Well, I'll see you in a few hours. The miasma has really been getting worse lately, hasn't it? Maybe we should team up with the others, like we used to. Back when we all fought together, we could really take on anything. The others are happy as they are.
Madoka nodded gravely and grabbed Homura's hand.
Well, thanks again for walking me home. See you soon.
Homura watched her friend clip-clop up to her house, greet her father, and disappear into the house. She remained watching for some time after, before she finally turned and snapped her fingers at two of her dolls.
Selbstsucht. I versucht.
The indicated dolls broke from the pack and climbed down the hedges to await their orders. She commanded them in German,
stand guard over Madoka's house. Ensure the incubator does not speak with her. Alert me if anyone other than her family approaches her.
The dolls nodded and tottered off with mischievous chuckles, dancing hand in hand across Madoka's lawn. Despite their antics, Homura had faith in their abilities. The dolls were ruthless when needed. She headed for her daily report on current events. The building in which she lived was wedged between two roads, a triangular two-story slice with an unassuming facade. Homura dismissed her remaining dolls and gave them leave to entertain themselves as they desired. She had 14 dolls at her disposal, although she mostly used them to keep Madoka safe when Homura herself could not be with her. They were also useful for subtly altering the courses of the other Metakiera girls when necessary. In extreme cases, they monitored the incubator. A 15th doll existed, which managed the law of the cycles for all magical girls across time and space. But that doll was permanently occupied and rarely factored into Homura's designs. Schematics for said designs floated throughout Homura's dusky living quarters. At any given moment she had blueprints planning the events of the next week, occasionally the next month, to an hour-by-hour basis. She reached through the levitating papers and plucked one that read November 18, 2013, 15 o'clock, walk Madoka home/discuss English test from the air, creasing it neatly down the middle and banishing it to the archives of her mind. Such micromanagement had always been her forte, but since her literal transformation into the adversary of God, or Satan, as some preferred, she found her capacity magnified exponentially. The incubator had yet to arrive. Funny. For all his sermons on efficiency, he always arrived tardy to their scheduled meetings. Not that she minded. She took the opportunity to check the statuses of the 4 other magical girls in the area, drawing the reports prepared by the dolls to the forefront of the floating file directory. Tomoe Memi, outwardly content. Sakura Kyoko, bored with school. Momoe Nagisa, desirous of cheese. Miki Sayaka, upset with Sakura. Nothing unusual, except Miki. If any of them caused trouble, it tended to be her. Now she was upset with Sakura? Probably nothing serious, but Homura made a mental note to peruse Miki's report in full detail later. Any issues with Miki needed to be suppressed swiftly before they burgeoned into a web of petty drama. The report would wait, as the incubator had arrived. The small white cat-like creature skulked on the other end of the room, beside the giant swinging pendulum that served as metronome for the pace of Homura's thoughts.
Come out. Give your report.
Homura had no wish to waste time with her most despised underling. The incubator crawled into the light, the otherwise omnipresent smile wiped from his immutable face. In the past week, 863 magical girls were killed in action or by the law of the cycles. 879 new magical girls were contracted. Regional breakdowns and historic trends can be viewed on these charts. From seemingly nowhere, a collection of large documents sprung into the air, slipping to the front of her files. She gave a cursory glance, her demi-omniscience allowing her to process the information nearly instantaneously. Slight decreases of magical girl populations in North America, Europe, and Oceania were offset by increased populations in the Middle East, coinciding with the renewal of conflict in Syria. Wars always required temporary boosts to recruitment, and these were within acceptable parameters. She had to keep a close eye on the statistics, because if she didn't, the incubator was liable to contract more than needed. Of the magical girls killed in action, 27 were killed by another magical girl. This continues the 5-month downward trend of magicides. You can read the individual case reports to confirm that all magicides transpired in unforeseeable circumstances of minor emotional consequence. More files floated to the fore. Homura flicked through them. 27 cases of opportunity, greed, or mischance. A remarkably low number considering the total number active. The provisions Homura had forced the incubator to adopt were working. Meanwhile, the incubator continued, the total energy harvested this week was only 87.3% of our quota. Another paper flew up but she waved it away.
That doesn't concern me.
It concerns the fate of the universe over which you preside and which you helped create. We implore you to reduce some of the stringent regulations you have placed on our ability to contract and control magical girls. With a wave of her hand, she swelled the incubator with a glut of unrefined emotional despair. She had nearly unlimited amounts of the stuff on standby because her soul gem served as the primary receptacle for the law of the cycles. The incubator crumpled and writhed with a series of jerky, spastic motions. He thrashed his tiny body against the carpet, grinding his agonized face into his paws. Stop, please. We beg you. The pain. She watched a few moments to try and determine how much was genuine and how much was hammy acting. Then she grew bored and twisted a mental nozzle. The stream of emotions ceased and the incubator quickly composed himself.
It should be apparent by now I do not require your advice on such issues.
Our apologies. That concludes the weekly report. Any further statistics can be found in the provided files. We will be leaving now.
Stay.
She flicked through the papers, absorbing the information on each sheet with a mere glance.
You failed to mention something of interest. There has been a sudden and unexpected infestation of wraiths in a remote area of the United States. A village called Williston. Why have you not explained this anomaly?
The Williston event is not an anomaly. It is a typical and predictable outcome of the socio-economic conditions which have caused the town's population to explode without proper infrastructural support to quell the resulting influx of sin and despair, leading to an Archon event. Similar conditions frequently occur in impoverished or war-stricken nations, like the current situation in Syria.
In Syria, you contracted more girls to compensate. There are no such increases in the Williston area.
The statistics tumbled through her mind effortlessly. But one of the things she had difficulty knowing, even with her godlike powers, was the inner workings of the incubator's mind. Even the minds of regular people could be tricky to navigate, but the incubator far exceeded a human in complexity. Hence her need to keep him on a short leash. Given the demographics of eligible female candidates in Williston, combating the wraiths via contracting was considered infeasible. Instead, we migrated magical girls from nearby cities.
Magicide chances increase significantly when magical girls are grouped together, said Homura. Give me intelligence on the girls you called in.
She had precious little interest in Williston or the girls involved in its cleansing. But if she let even the tiniest detail slip, the incubator would learn to exploit such holes in her omniscience. If only she could do away with him and assign her dolls to contract magical girls and collect grief cubes. She had crunched the logistics 1,000 times with 1,000 different equations and parameters, replacing the incubator's talents was simply impossible. More files. She scanned them at a glance.
Only 3 girls. Considering the urgency of the situation, this is acceptable. Although I question the addition of this Sloan Redfearn girl. Your statistics give her a low chance of survival, and her necessity to the mission is dubious at best.
The inclusion of Sloan Redfearn is not meant to improve the mission's odds. If you look deeper into her file, you will note she is a large magicide risk if left unchecked. The slow decline of her soul gem has increased her desperation and the danger of unwanted action. Surely, you would vouch for her termination? Sloan Redfearn had a particularly detailed and easy-to-read file, aided by the fact that her magic was based on visibility. Sometimes girls could be nearly impossible reads, which always made Homura mistrustful. Miss Redfern's file painted a portrait of someone who had spent 7 months nursing a death grudge against a fellow magical girl, living in complete isolation in a hellish tundra. The magical potential of Miss Redfearn and the girl she had vowed vengeance against were fairly high, which only exacerbated matters. Sloan Redfearn was indeed a prime candidate for termination. The odds indicate that Miss Redfearn will die soon, one way or another. Is it not better for her death to come fighting wraiths rather than fighting another magical girl? She banished the file on Sloan Redfearn to the back of the stack.
The other girls are suspect as well. Erica Dufresne has shown exceptional competitiveness and the inability to work with others. Delaney Pollock's sordid past should have marked her for termination 3 years ago. In fact, she has already been tied to an Archon event. This team you have assembled is a powder keg waiting to explode.
Erica Dufresne's competitiveness has never manifested into magicide, even in self-defense. In fact, she takes great care her opponents survive. Her motivations, territory and prestige are both unwanted by the other members of the team, reducing the chance of conflict.
And Pollock?
Homura drew up a detailed report on the girl from Saskatchewan.
This girl is problematic in many ways. Why was she even contracted?
You'll note her high magical potential and despair tolerance. We admit we underestimated her emotional issues, but in the past 3 years she has had no incidents whatsoever. It's safe to say she has reformed.
People don't reform.
Homura flicked the files away.
Considering the urgency and remoteness of the situation, I'll give your methods a tentative pass. However, I am keeping a close eye on Williston. I want a follow-up report at our next meeting.
Of course. No other anomalous occurrences, other than the aforementioned Syria conflict. Information, data, names flooded through her mind, processed and sorted instantaneously. The incubator middle managed more or less to her liking. He had not made a major mistake for almost a year. She didn't trust it.
That is all. You may leave.
By the time Homura turned around, the incubator had vanished. The guillotine pendulum swung back and forth, the pages and files drifted, shadows ate the corners of the room. Loosening the bow of her schoolgirl uniform, she plopped into one of the couches in the center of the room, allowing her legs to dangle over the side. She stared at the ceiling as the overloaded information ebbed from her brain, melting into a viscous puddle at the base of her skull. The factoids and statistics left her as her eyes glazed over, the sullied puddle oozing into nothingness, leaving behind only a single, pure image on the cataract film spread across her irises, that of Madoka Kaname, the one for whom she did all that she did. The stairway leading to the Williston City Hall was paved with the corpses of plaid-shirted men, ragged little skeletons clutching strips of dirty cloth. The City Hall itself rose to the dark sky, a medieval fortress of stone walls and jagged parapets. The arched double doors beckoned to the 3 girls who ascended the steps, girls who had moments before existed as a collection of names in Homura Akemi's itinerary. The route from the inn to the City Hall had been much shorter than their previous foray into the miasma, and they had encountered much less resistance. Not a single greater wraith had reared its ugly head, and the clusters of lesser ones that swayed into the road were obliterated wholesale by the combined power of Sloan and Winnipeg, all meager counterattacks blocked by Delaney's barriers.
"Should we expect a trap?"
said Sloan. She had managed her magic well so far, and her performance had no hiccups. Her goal was to survive the excursion without horrendous embarrassment. It wasn't a pride thing, although the scorn Winnipeg exuded did bite deep for some reason. It had to do with Minneapolis. Claire Ibsen defeated Sloan at peak form and confidence. Sloan's ultimate goal was to crush Claire, so mere survival in Williston was not an option. She had to flourish.
"We should expect an Archon in there, love," said Delaney. "That's why we came, after all."
They reached the top of the stairs and paused before the open doorway. Dead air whistled through.
"If we find the Archon, what's the plan?" said Sloan. "The plan is hit it until it dies."
Winnipeg plunged through the doors and disappeared in a wisp of shadow. Sloan ran after, leaving Delaney in the rear. She had learned not to linger at the back, where Delaney might forget her. Entering the city hall was like entering yet another world, a pocket dimension inside a pocket dimension. As they crossed the threshold, the way back to the streets of Williston fell into obscurity, and the grand main hall of the feudal castle lit up with a line of pale torches that shed grey light across the stones, carpets, and tapestries of the cyclopean construction. Oaken doors filled the spaces between the torches. At the end of the hall hung a map of the city, identical to Delaney's map. It had the same schematic red ink and the same locations circled and the same jagged tier down the middle. It had been blown to astronomical proportions and now hung in the hall to mock them.
"Too many doors," said Sloan. "Fear not, love. Remember, in the real world, this city hall is little more than a dumpy little thing. These added doors are but illusions."
Delaney stepped in front, her heels clicking against the opulent reflective floor. She held aloft her staff and summoned thousands of bubbles in a spiral pattern before her. With a trenchant wave, she zipped the bubbles down the hall. Some broke from the main pack to slam into each door, splattering in eruptions of blood. At first, Sloan didn't understand. But as the blood drizzled down the doors drizzled too, washing away like crayon. After a few moments, all but 3 had resolved into dew. You're useful after all, said Winnipeg. She took point and headed for the closest door. Delaney flashed a charming wink and struck a pose with sparkly pizzazz.
Brute force only achieves so much.
Sloan hefted her machine gun and followed.
You wished for a puppy and this is how you turned out. Well, some other things happened.
Delaney shrugged.
Let's not worry about that, love. Keep close to me. Don't put much faith in the walls here, they're liable to shift.
Sloan didn't need reminding. The walls of the inn had almost crushed her when they first entered town. They entered a library of towering metal cabinets instead of shelves, monstrous manila folders instead of books. The cabinets fanned out in a precarious labyrinth of handles and rippling tin, their tops too shrouded in shadow to see. No obvious direction or destination existed, but Winnipeg hurried down a random corridor with her katana drawn and forced the others to follow. Some of the upper cabinets hung open. Unseen creatures rummaged through the contents, smacking and chomping heavy lips. Flecks of shredded paper drifted down and coated the floor. As they meandered between the columns, Sloan snatched a scrap out of the air and turned it over. The words were scrawled in stylized German, brimming with umlauts, tangled compounds, and thick consonants. It did not look like an official town record. She crumpled the scrap and looked up. A wall of filing cabinets barred her way. The wall had not been there before. Delaney and Winnipeg had vanished. Paths curled in every direction, terminating in either darkness or a dead end. Somewhere in the distance, a wall groaned and shifted with an avalanche of documents. Godfuck. You fucking retard, Delaney warned you about the walls literally 5 seconds ago and you fucked it up. Stamp a big red failure on survive the excursion without horrendous embarrassment. She clenched her fists, locked her jaw, broadcasted telepathically, I got cut off. Oh dear, love. I do believe I warned you like 3 seconds ago to be careful about this sort of thing. Thanks for the reminder, Delaney. Sloan had totally forgotten. The Wraiths marked you as the weak link, said Winnipeg. Be smart and retreat to the inn. We won't need you anyway. I'm blasting through. Stand back. The gnawing and munching from the open cabinets stopped. Over the edges peeked malformed, impish wraiths. In unison they crawled out and began climbing down, their faces abuzz with static. Sloan aimed her gun and fired at the wall. The cabinets rattled and quivered with a metallic gurgle as a blinding aura filled the corridor, purging the imp wraiths that crawled too close. When Sloan released the trigger, a solid circular opening had been chewed through the metal. Delaney and Winnipeg weren't there. God damn it, Sloan said. Where did you go? Nowhere, said Winnipeg. We're at exactly the same spot. Where are you? Sloan peered through the opening. Only limitless corridors of cabinets sprawled onward. What the hell was this funhouse? Onto the tile around her plopped upside-down imps, squirming themselves upright like scarabs. First only a few, but soon they were piling atop one another, covering the ground in a writhing mass. An imp clawed at her shin and she smashed it with a boot sole before swinging her gun and unleashing hellfire onto the crowd. The imps squealed as her light disintegrated them, but more and more came tumbling down. One sank needlepoint teeth into her ankle. She crushed it with her other leg, but more crawled for her, cretinous dwarfs with stumpy proportions and misshapen limbs. You all right, love? Asked Delaney from somewhere. As the sea of imps came crashing down, Sloan hurled her machine gun aside and backflipped onto the wall, latching onto the cabinet handles. Immediately the creatures scrambled after her. Her levitating machine gun seared ranks to cinders at her mental beck, but the ceaseless tides only multiplied. One dropped onto her head, digging ratty claws into her scalp. She slammed it against the wall and sent it plummeting to its fellows. With one graceful leap she pushed from the wall, bounced atop her floating gun, and bounded onto the next tower of cabinets, grabbing the handles for support. The imps came crashing after her, hurdling the gap in a lemming leap, plunging to the ground and crawling up the new wall. She jumped back to the first wall, gaining a little height and a momentum and barely pausing before leaping again across the divide. The imps toppled after her. She only fired at the few who got close, using her gun more as a platform for her acrobatics as she caromed between the walls like goddamn Super Mario. The pillars of cabinet shelves had to have some top. If she could reach it, she would gain vantage over the library and find her companions and salvage at least some scrap of competence from her latest mistake. But as she continued her trapeze act and the ground grew distant, the cabinets only continued to soar into the void above. The imps had fallen further behind, but Sloan perceived no end in sight. She quit jumping for a moment to survey the vertiginous surroundings. The instant she stopped, the shelves around her burst open, unleashing a nest of imps in a flurry of shredded paper. The entire wall reverberated with metallic twanging and began to move, scraping horizontal to flatten her against the opposite wall. Sloan released her grip and plunged between the closing walls. Imps halfway in their climb groped for her as she dropped. With a swing of her arm, she circled her gun below her, clearing a landing with a single ray of erasure through the writhing bodies. She hit the ground on a perfect parkour roll, distributing the brunt of impact with her magic. Immediately, she somersaulted to her feet and sprinted down the aisle, diving through the closing walls and leaving the imps to be squashed behind her. But really, love, are you okay? Fucking dandy, Sloan transmitted as another frantically whooping horde of imps dropped down in pursuit. The corridor zigzagged randomly. The walls loosed primordial rumbles as they twisted to block her path. Cabinets shot out to trip her, but she either slid under or leapt over them. Her lungs pounded and her legs ached, and she felt maybe she hadn't stuck her landing so perfectly, because a dull throb set into one of her bones, maybe a fracture or maybe psychosomatic, she didn't know, she could only run like hell. She rounded a corner only to crash face first into a wall. She bounced back onto her ass. A dead end. Her hand shot for the nearest cabinet so she could try to climb again, but already the imps were on her. Several kamikaze plunged onto her floating gun, forcing the barrel's aim as they pounded gnarled feet against it. Its fire sagged uselessly into a wall. Several imps leapt onto her back and clawed at her coat. She flailed her arms at them, frying them with pulses of light from her fingertips. She staggered into the dead end, still no sign of Delaney or Winnipeg, options dwindling. The imps slowed their assault, understanding they had her cornered, none wanting to be the first forward as she faced them with her hands afire. Magical exhaustion had yet to set in, which meant she had hope. If the Wraith Redential wanted to take her, they would pay dearly in their own cooked corpses. The front lines of the army advanced hesitantly, little feet scuffling across the tile. Many of the wraiths clucked and chuckled at her, some outright cackled. She pointed her palm at an imp and erased it with a ray of light to send a message. The imps drew back, only to quickly renew their cautious forward motion. Sloan braced herself for a brawl to the death. Then a hand settled on her wrist and the world went colorless and hazy. The imps drew back in surprise, but they did not attack. They did not start moving forward again. They stared at her, or rather, the place where she was standing, with eyeless faces, collective mouths agape. Sloan faced whoever had grabbed her wrist, who until then had been unseen. The mousy dark-haired girl she had met on the bus in Bismarck peered back timorous and tremulous. The same girl who had bitten Sloan's hand. The girl with the power to disappear. Murmuring to themselves, the imps turned and slinked back to their cabinets, unable to see Sloan and the girl who saved her.